going on, everybody, and welcome to this course where we are going to be learning how to build out awesome websites with Django from the ground up. So we're going to start as absolute beginners, where I'll first introduce you to what Django is and how it works, and then we'll move on to building out a basic website where we'll spin up a server, we'll render some templates and add a database to that, and we'll even learn how to work with that database. So we'll add in things like authentication and search, and we'll really focus on the core features of Django and how things work. Now, in the second half of this course, what I'm going to do is take the same project and we're going to start adding features into it and turning this into a really cool application. So I'm about to demo this for you in a second, but this project is kind of like a Discord clone and a search engine for people that want to study and find other people to study with. Now, it's not specific for developers, but imagine that you want to, let's say, study Django. So you can go ahead and create like a chat room. People can find this chat room and then join in and communicate with you. So with that being said, let me just go ahead and demo the project, and then we'll talk about the core structure and how things will continue from here. Okay, so this is the project that our website will eventually turn into as we progress through the course here. So if you actually want to see a live version of this website, go to studybud.dev and you can check it out and actually see the site for yourself here. So in this website, we have a basic feed here of different study rooms. So we can see this list right here. It kind of looks like a social networking feed where you just see posts. Anybody here can create a room here. They can set up a topic here, and they can see their room posted out here. So let's say I go to this website and I see this room right here, and I want to learn about Vue here. So Vue is an awesome front-end framework, so I want to check it out. I can see how many people have joined. I can see 5 people there and when it was posted. So the host here is Praveen, so I can see his profile. So the host does get credit for sharing the room. I can click on this room and I can see the conversation. So on the right side, I see all the participants here, and I can see the chat room right here. So this is supposed to kind of look like Discord here. So it's like a Discord server where anybody can hop in and they can just message something, and I'll just say anyone here. So I'll ask a question, see if anyone's on, and my message appears right here. So it tells me when it was posted. Anybody can click on my account and they can view my profile. So we'll go back to the homepage here, and on the side here, we have multiple ways of searching. So we have a search bar here where I can just say C#, for example. I want to see if any topic or any room has this topic, or maybe has C# in the title. So if I type that in, I can see C# developers right here. So I can clear my search here. I can use this search bar, or I can go in here and just search for all the topics with Python here. I can see all the designers and so on. So this is going to filter my rooms down by the topic, and it's also going to filter down the activity feed. So just to create more engagement on the website, I thought it would be cool to add in this activity feed here. So you see how I just commented something? Well, I added this in where we can always see activity based on certain rooms here. So I can see that Dennis replied to Vue.js developers, and here is my message. So it creates a little bit more engagement here. So that's pretty much the application here. So anybody can go and view my profile here. I can see all of my posts here. So if I go to someone else's account, I can see their post. We can modify our application. We can go here, upload pictures here, and I'm a little bit too zoomed in, so that's why it looks like that. So we can edit our account. There is authentication, so we can log out here, log back in, or register, and we are good to go. So that's essentially the site here. So we're going to start from the beginning, and this is what the project will morph into. So we're going to learn a lot throughout this process. Let's take a quick look at some of the things you should understand before taking this course. So the first thing is you should have a basic understanding of the Python syntax. So things like variables, if and else statements, functions, loops, classes. If you know these things, then that's enough to move on with Django. As far as the front end, you should have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. We are going to be working with templates here. So if you don't know HTML at all, well, it's going to be pretty difficult here. We won't write too much. We are just going to install a theme, but you will need to understand what's going on in order to install that theme. So those 3 things, Python, HTML, CSS, and you should be good to go. So before we get started, since this video does not have an official sponsor, I guess I'll be the sponsor here and tell you about my new Django course that recently went public, where I cover Django from A to Z in 19 hours. So in this course, I go into detail on a lot more topics. I cover certain topics that we don't address here. So if you want to become a better Django developer and enhance your skills, go ahead and check that out. There is a promo code in the video description for 50% off. So it's going to be $9.99 and use the promo code Brad. Now, this course from the first month that it was launched on Udemy also, so I have it on my own platform and on Udemy. This was a top seller immediately. So there's a lot of good reviews on it. People really like this course and are learning a lot from it. So definitely check that out. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to run through a couple of slides here, get you introduced to what Django is, and then we'll move on to setting up our environment. So what is Django? So Django is a Python-based web framework, and it is a backend framework, so it's on the server side. And this just means that we can use Python to build websites. So Python is one of the top programming languages. Django is one of the top frameworks for Python. It's actually the #1 used framework. So it's an absolutely great choice, great for beginners, and it makes for building websites super fast. I absolutely love it. So it is more of a heavyweight framework, so it uses a batteries included approach, and that means that it really is more opinionated in how you build out your application, and that's not a bad thing. We'll get into that later. But with this, you get more packages, libraries, and modules, and you follow a good design structure where in Python, a lightweight framework might be something like Flask, and some people may like it because it's not opinionated. But because of that, you're typically installing a lot of packages yourself. If you're newer, you may not follow the best design structure. So you may not have a good, framework or structure in how you're building your application. So the fact that Django really forces you to do things a certain way, I think is a great thing. And it does not mean that you cannot customize it. Companies customize this all the time. A lot of big organizations that have great engineers completely bend Django to their will and how they actually want things structured. So if I were to compare Django to another framework for another language, I'd probably say it's more like Rails, Ruby and Rails. With PHP and Laravel, it's more like Laravel, whereas Flask is more like Express for Node.js. And I'm trying to think of another one. I'll just use that one as the last reference, but it's more lightweight. One, you can do whatever you want. Django kind of forces you to do things a certain way, but I think that's a great thing, especially if you're newer to web development. So it uses the MVT design pattern. A lot of people may have heard of MVC, Model View Controller. For Django, it's Model View Template, and we'll get into that in a minute. So what is a web framework? So for those of you that don't even know what this is, a web framework is simply a collection of modules, packages, and libraries designed to speed up web development. So it's just kind of like a package, if you can think of it in one way, where you're not having to use Python code to do absolutely everything. It really pre-configures a lot for you and is designed for one specific purpose, in this case for building websites. So I would strongly advise against you hand coding absolutely everything by yourself. So it's going to make things a lot easier. So backend frameworks versus front-end frameworks. I already mentioned Laravel, but on the left side there, we have our backend frameworks. We have PHP, which is the language, Laravel or Laravel, however you say that, that's the framework. For Python, we have Django. There's also other ones for Python. Obviously, I mentioned Flask. For Node, we have Express. So you have the language and the framework. Now, there are front-end frameworks, so client side. These actually work well with our backend languages. So we have React, Angular, Vue. I actually used Angular and Vue with Django, so they're not in competition to each other. They handle different parts. Front-end frameworks handle all the front-end logic typically. We would probably build out some kind of API to connect to one of these, and that's how we would communicate. It doesn't mean that we need a front-end framework. Django has its own templating engine, but if you wanted to use a front-end framework, that would absolutely work. So what can you build with Django? So this is one of my favorite topics here because I like to just show the companies that use Django and let them validate the power of what Django can do. So if I were to mention a few things myself, I would say an e-commerce website, a social network. You can build out an API for a mobile app. Now Django can't actually build a mobile app for you. You can use part of Django to build one though. So if you want to provide some API data, you can do it. That's a topic for another day. So in these companies, we have Pinterest, we have Spotify, Udemy, Dropbox. All of these companies should validate whether Django is the right choice for you or if it can do what you desire it to do. So this is pretty much showing that it can do pretty much anything. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be the best option, but it can do a lot. I know Instagram relied heavily on Django in the beginning. I'm not sure what version of it they use or how much they've customized it, but I know a lot of these companies used it at some point and probably modified it to whatever they needed. Now, YouTube, I can't really confirm whether YouTube used it or not. And the reason why I put it here is because I read a lot of articles on YouTube using it. A lot of people saying that they did, but I couldn't find anything that validated it. So I put it here just to say that there's a chance that they used it, but this is something that you can build with Django. So there's no reason why you couldn't build something like a YouTube website or a YouTube-like website. So building APIs, a lot of you might be wanting to learn Django just to learn how to build out APIs, and that's totally fine. If you want to build out a mobile app or use some kind of front-end framework, you need some API data. Django makes this absolutely easy. They have something called the Django REST framework, which is built on top of Django, and the REST framework helps you build REST APIs or just APIs. So this makes this really fast. Absolutely love it. We'll get into this towards the end of the series. I'm super excited for this part. So I did want to mention some other frameworks before we get started, just to kind of let you do your own research. I mentioned Flask earlier. It's a Python-based web framework. It's more lightweight. I would recommend you check it out. I personally think Django is much better. I don't see why you'd want to use Flask, but in some cases it could be useful. CherryPy, Web2Py, and Pyramid. I've never used those, but I would say check it out, do your research. But I really think the competition here, if there is any, is between Django and Flask here. I wouldn't probably even mention the other three, but still, don't take my word for it. Do your own research. So the MVT model structure or design pattern. So Django follows the MVT structure. There's the model view controller structure, which a lot of you from other frameworks may be familiar with. Django follows the MVT, and the only difference here is that Django takes care of the controller aspect of things. So for those of you that are completely new, MVT, we have model, the data access layer. That's your database. That's how we model data. This is going to be your database tables built out in classes. Your templates, that's your presentation layer. This is what the user sees. That's going to be their page, their web page. And then the view is the business logic. So if you were to look at an example here, we have facebook.com. And when someone goes to facebook.com, they're going to be going through some URLs here. We're going to find a URL that matches some kind of function in the backend, and that's going to be our views. Those views right there in the view layer, that's going to go ahead and get some data probably from the models, and it's going to render some kind of template to us, and we send that back to the user. So that's the flow here. We're requesting data, the views, the business logic, and we just get this and send it back to the user. So that's the MVT design pattern, very similar to MVC. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll start setting up our environment, and in the video after that, we will start setting up our project. Okay, so let's first start off with some helpful resources for this course as you go along with the tutorial here. So the first thing is the source code. So that is up on GitHub. It's in this link right here, and it will be linked down in the video description. So I would highly recommend you clone this project, check out the source code, and review the code as you're coding along, and look through areas where you have any questions. All the code here will be what I coded up throughout the tutorial. Now, if you want to clone it and set it up locally, there will be instructions in the README file on how to do that. So that way you can get a feel for the project and use it, maybe tinker with the actual source code and just see how it all works. So after the source code, I would highly recommend you use the Django documentation. I will reference this throughout the tutorial, but Django has some of the best documentation I've ever seen, and I would highly recommend you use it. Now, I understand that it could be intimidating for people just to start with the documentation, so that's why you're watching a tutorial like this, so I can guide you. But once you have a question on maybe how something works or specifics, reference the documentation, please. It will help you a lot. So let's go ahead and close that out, and let's talk about my environment setup. So I'm going to be using VS Code. You can use whatever text editor you want. If you have Atom, Sublime Text, even Notepad++, any one of those will work, but I like VS Code. So if you're using VS Code, I want to show you my setup, the theme, and some extensions that I will be using. So if you're not using VS Code, I still want you to watch this because I am using some extensions that are going to change up how things function. So I want to make sure you see that and understand why it's happening. So django1 Dark Pro is the theme I'm using. So if you want to use the theme, everybody asks me about it, go ahead and use django1 Dark Pro. It's a really cool theme, and for some reason it's not set here right now, but that is what I'm using. So that's the theme, and I'm also using an extension called Prettier. So Prettier is really cool because it auto formats my code here. So if I use the Prettier code formatter, this right here will basically format my code anytime I save it. So if I write out some HTML code and it's not perfectly formatted, if I hit Control S or save, you'll see my code just kind of jump into place. So when you see my code jump like that, it's because of Prettier. It really helps me. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. I'm also using something called auto rename tag. So auto rename tag, this basically allows me to rename a opening tag, and the closing tag will also rename. So it's auto renaming it. So if you look at this example right here, when this tag gets renamed, you see the closing tag get renamed, and it goes vice versa if you rename the closing tag. So you're not going to see me edit both HTML tags as I go through that. So that's it. I would recommend you check out the documentation, the source code. These are the extensions that I have. If I forget at any point, I'll try to mention those throughout the course. And let's go ahead and get on with installing our project and setting up our Python download and Django installation. Okay, so before we get started here, I first want to make sure that you have Python installed on your computer. And if you already have it installed, I also want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date or compatible version of Python in order to work with Django here. So if you already have Python installed, what you could do is simply go ahead and update it to the latest version. That way, once you're installing Django, it's going to make sure that you have the latest versions of both, and those two should be compatible. Now, if you don't want to update it, maybe you need Python in a specific version or you think it's up to date, just go ahead and go to this link right here in the Django documentation. Just look up Python Django compatibility if you can't find this link, and it should show you this section right here. And this simply tells us the version of Django that's compatible to specific versions of Python. So at this point in time, the latest version of Django is 3.2, and this is compatible with Python 3.6 all the way to 3.9. So these are the latest versions. If you're watching this video maybe a year or two out, you might want to check this. Maybe just make sure that you're either in the latest versions or that whatever you're using is compatible. So I already have Python 3.95 downloaded, so I'm good to go. But if you're wanting to update or download for the first time, go to python.org and then go ahead and click on the downloads link. And in here, go ahead and download the installer. Make sure you get whatever you need for your operating system, and then go ahead and click on that installer. I'm not going to do this because I already have it, but this should take a minute or two, maybe just to go through and install Python or simply update it. So once you have that complete, let's go ahead and move on to the next step here. So my entire project is going to be on my desktop, and I am using a Windows machine. So let's go ahead and open up our command prompt here. So later on, I will switch to VS Code, but just to get things started, I'm going to use the command prompt, and you can host your project wherever you want, but I'm going to host mine on my desktop. I cleared it for everything, and I just want to make sure everything's here so it's easier. So we're on our desktop, and if you just downloaded Python or you want to check the version, go ahead and do that. That's going to tell you the version of Python. In my case, I have Python 3.95. I'm good to go. And let's go ahead and hit exit. So at this point, we'll clear that terminal. What we could do is go ahead and just install Django globally. So if I do pip install Django, this is going to install Django on my computer. Now, I like to use a virtual environment. In theory, you don't actually need one, but it's really good practice to use them. It's going to separate all your installs from your global machine or any other environments that you have, and that way there's not going to be any conflict. So you can skip this step and go ahead and install Django directly, but I'd recommend you follow this. And we're going to use virtual env. So we'll do pip install virtual env. So I always have a hard time spelling that one for some reason. Okay. So I already have it installed. It tells me I'm good to go. There's also a pip env that you can use. So this is just a package that allows us to set up virtual environments. So virtual env is installed, and now I can just run the command virtual env, and I can call my environment whatever I want. In my case, I'm just going to call it env. You can call this my env or whatever name you want. And because I'm running this from my desktop, so make sure that wherever you're running this from, you know that file path. Go ahead and hit enter, and that's going to create your environment. So this should take a second. So on my desktop, I can now see this file right here, or this folder. So I'm pretty zoomed in. You should be able to see that. So we have a folder called env, and that's our virtual environment. We're not going to open it up. We're not going to deal with it. The only thing we're going to do here is go ahead and activate it. So make sure the file path is there. And on Windows, I can just do env scripts. So whatever I call the environment, scripts, and then we'll just do activate. So on a Mac, it might be a little bit different. Just look up the difference here. It's not too much. I don't remember exactly what that was, but we just activated our virtual environment. So now we're inside of here instead of our global machine. Now we know it's activated because we can see the environment name right there, and we can always deactivate our environment. So we can just do deactivate like that. That's going to turn it off. So now you don't see that right there in the file path, and we can reactivate. Now the reason why I show you that is because I've had people set this process up and then turn off their computer, log back in, and they don't know why Django or all the commands aren't working. That's because they forgot to turn on their environment. So every time you open this up, you're gonna have to turn on the environment because all the installs and other packages that we set up will be in here if you set this up here like this. So now let's go ahead and clear that. So we created the environment, it's active right here. Make sure you run that script, and let's just do pip install Django. So that's all we need to do. And this is gonna take a second or two. It's gonna install Django for us. We can do this now because we have Python installed. Let's see, maybe I need to hit enter again. So that's gonna take a second here, so give it some time. Okay, so we have Django installed. And at this point, it looks like everything's successful. So if you're seeing this, we're good to go. We have Django, and at this point, I'm just gonna clear this again. So we'll do CLS, and I'm gonna do django-admin. So now that I installed Django, I have access to this command. If I hit execute or enter, I'm gonna see all these commands that I can now run from django-admin. And in here, we're gonna focus on a few here. So the main ones that we're gonna see are gonna be make migrations, migrate. These are commands that we're gonna work with or use to work with our database. We're gonna use run server. That's gonna start up our development server, and we're also gonna use start project or start app and start project. So we now have access to this. We know Django is installed. So let's go ahead and clear this again. And now let's go ahead and just do django-admin, and we'll do start project. So once we do start project, we need to give our project a name. So let's go ahead and call it study bud. You can call it whatever you want. So this is gonna be the project name. And what this command is going to do is it's going to create my boilerplate files to set up my Django application. So it's going to give me my core configuration and basically my project here. So once I run this on my desktop, we're going to see study bud right here, and we can see our virtual environment. So these are the two things that we created, and we're going to go through the Django files in a second here. But at this point, if you're running this from your command prompt, just go ahead and cd into study bud. So cd into your Django project. We'll look at the files in a second. And now let's just go ahead and run python manage.py run server. So we're going to start up the Django development server, and we're going to take a look at what we currently have. So at this point, it looks like we're all good. We see this note right here that tells us we have unapplied migrations. We'll get to that once we start working with the database. And we also see that we are currently running on port 8000 right here. So we can go ahead and just copy this. So on the command prompt, it's a little bit harder. I can highlight that, and I typically have to go to this bar right here and hit edit and then copy. So you could just write that out manually, but once you have that copied, you can just go ahead and open up your browser and paste that into the browser. One thing I like to do is paste it in, and I also save that as a tab so I can always hit this shortcut here. So I could do this manually like that, or if I open up a new tab, I hit that shortcut, and there we go. So I like to save it there, so every time I'm working with it, I'm not having to copy and paste. So we just started up our Django server, and this is the project that we currently have. So we actually have something running right now. We have a server on and the boilerplate configuration that Django gives us. So if you see this, we're good to go so far, and we can move on to the next step here. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and actually close that out. So I turned off my server. We'll have to refresh that. And everyone can store their environment in a different way. What I like to do here is take the virtual environment and drag that into my Django project. So I'm going to open up my text editor. So in this case, I'm using VS Code. If you're using something else, you'll still just use the command prompt unless it's already built into the text editor. In VS Code, it's already built in. So at this point, we'll go ahead and open up the folder. We'll go to the desktop, and let's just go ahead and go to the project files. So we see StudyBud, and we see all our boilerplate files along with the virtual environment I just dragged in. So I like to have it in here. And if I open up the terminal, we could open it up by just going to terminal right here and do a new terminal, or we could do a shortcut by just hitting control and then tilde. So it's that weird backtick looking thing on the top left of your keyboard typically. So go ahead and open up your terminal that way. So at this point, my virtual environment is already activated by default. You might have to run env scripts activate. In this case, the file path is inside of the project folder. So here we see it and it's activated. So make sure that you do that and that's all set up. So I'll turn on my server right now again. So we'll do python manage.py and then run server. And if my face is blocking it, we'll go ahead and move that. So we just ran run server, and yeah, that was all the commands. So it just blocked that last part there. So we see these unapplied migrations. We're not worried about those right now. It's not going to give us an error. We'll go back to that server, refresh it, and we're still good. So let's do a quick breakdown. I'm not going to go into too much detail in my full Django course. I really try to break down as much as I can here, but we'll just go over the core Django files here. So python manage.py, or the manage.py file, this is where we execute our commands from. We're not going to touch this. That's something that allows us to execute those commands. We do get a default database with Django. So SQLite is a default database. In production, you typically use something like MySQL, Postgres. You can even use NoSQL databases with Django, but we're going to stick with the SQLite database here. So we're not going into the virtual environment here. That's our different file. Inside of our project, we're going to see some more here. So we have a WSGI file. This stands for Web Server Gateway Interface right here. This is the actual server. And then we have a urls.py file. So this is going to be all the routing, the URL routing to our project. So when you go to a specific page, so if you're going to the home page or the about page of a website, this is where we configure all the URLs here. So this is going to be just a list of different URL paths like this. So one would be something like home, and then you'd have about and so on. So it's just a Python list of URL routes. So that's how that's going to be configured later on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that comment right there. So we'll save that. Then we also have a ASGI file. This is going to be for asynchronous, asynchronous calls here. We can actually change that up. Django does have async support. We won't deal with that. And at this point, the main file that we're going to work with is going to be settings.py and urls.py. So settings.py is like our core project configuration. This is like the command center to our entire project. If we go through it, I'm not going to go to every single item, but here we have things like all the URLs that are allowed to go to this website or to point to it. We see all installed apps, which we're going to get to. We see all middleware configuration, templates, database configuration. For example, we see the database, and this is pointing to the base directory, which is the root directory right here, and it's pointing to the SQLite database. So this is how we can actually see how it's connecting to everything. So we have templates, databases, URLs, and everything like that inside of our application, along with static file configuration. So think of settings.py as the core project configuration. Okay, so now we actually want to work on rendering some things out and changing that default template that you saw where we're just getting that boilerplate file in Django once we see our server. So in Django, we are going to work with something called apps here. So we already see default apps configured. There are apps that handle different parts of our application, things that handle sessions inside of our application, user management, and so on. And basically, apps are little components of our website that handle different parts of a website. Now, imagine it this way. So if you had something like facebook.com, imagine that was built by or built with using Django. You would have an app for handling all your users. Then you can have an app for handling all the groups inside of Facebook. You can have an app for handling all user posts. So these are just broken down into different parts. Now, the application that we're going to have here is not going to be that big. So we're just going to stick to one app. And this app is where we're going to configure all of our models, which is our database, all the URL routing, and all the views that are going to handle basically the business logic of our application. So I'm done talking, just wanted to give you that overview. Let's go ahead and move on. So in order to create our first app here, we're going to go ahead and you could open up another command prompt or another terminal if you're using the command prompt, or you could just go ahead and hit plus here. That way we're not turning off our server. And we're just going to open up a new terminal and then run a command here. So we're just going to do python manage.py start app. So just like the start project command, we can now run start app, and this is going to be able to create an app for us. And I'm going to call this base. It's going to be like our base application. So we're just going to hit enter. and we're going to see a folder get generated in here. So at this point, the Django project doesn't actually know about this app yet, so we're going to have to connect it. All it is a folder inside of our Django project. So inside of base, we see our views, and this is basically what happens when someone goes to a specific URL. These are going to be functions or classes, and these are going to fire off things like any kind of queries to the database, any templates that we need to render. This is what's going to be called when someone goes to a specific URL. So those are going to be our views. We have our models.py file. This is where we're going to configure the database, and then different parts like our admin panel and core app configuration. So let's go ahead and go back to the main project file. So study button here, and let's go back into settings.py. So we need to let this project know about this new app that we just added. So inside of installed apps, what we could do is we could just go ahead and add in base like that, and it will know about this folder here. Now, what I like to do is I like to specify the direct file path to configure it to the app. So what I'm going to do is go into base. We'll go into apps here, and this is going into the base folder. So pay attention to the file structure. We're going into the apps.py file, and we're going to the base config class. So this is going to connect it to the app directly. So we're just going to go ahead and do dot base config. And now this project right here knows about this new app that we just added. So I'll just go ahead and install some defaults that VS Code wants me to install. Run that installation, we'll close that out. And there we go. So now Django knows about our app. So let's talk about our URL routing and our views. So typically all of our views are going to be handled inside of the views.py file from that app that we created. So I want to show you a quick shortcut because I want to show you how this logic works. So let's go ahead and go into urls.py. So this is our core URLs file. Now we can have multiple URLs files here. We're going to actually use just two here. We're going to have a root URLs file and then one for our specific app. So to create a view, we're going to use function-based views here. So we're going to create a function and we're going to call this home, and let's go ahead and pass in the request object. So the request object is going to be the HTTP object. This is going to tell us what kind of request method is sent, what kind of data is being passed in, what's the user sending to the backend here. So we have a request object, which we'll print out and show you later. And then what we need to do is simply return something. At this point, I'm just going to return back a simple HTTP response. We're not actually going to render a template yet, so we'll just do from django.http import HTTP response. That's a capital H and a capital R. So we're just going to return back a simple response here. So we're just going to go ahead and say home page. So it's just going to be a string that we're going to render out. And now we're going into our URLs and we're going to say when someone goes to the home page, so we're going to set a path here. So that's imported right here. We're going to set a path here, and then the home page is going to be the root domain. You can see a path right here. We have an admin file. We're not going to work with that yet. So when someone goes to the home page, which is an empty string, so that means that that's just a core URL, we're going to send that user to home. So we're going to trigger this function, and that's it. So we're just going to tell it which function we're going to trigger, and we're going to return back this HTTP response. So we'll go ahead and save that. And let's open up our website. So now when I refresh this, we don't have that default, we see the home page. So that's a simple HTTP response right here. So we'll zoom in a little bit, and there we go. Now I want to show you one more page. So we'll create another function. Typically we won't create our views here. I'm just doing this for practice. And let's just say, let's see, what's another route we're going to do? We're going to do rooms. So our website is going to have rooms. So we're going to have rooms for different conversations. We're going to pass in the request object, and this is going to return a specific page for a room. So we'll just go ahead and do return, and we can pass in HTTP response, and we'll just say room like that. Now, in order to specify the path, we would specify it like that. Set the route. So we're going to have a few parameters. This one is going to be the route that we're going to. So we'll just do room / and then the function that we want to call. So in this case, because we're using function-based views, it's just going to be a function. We'll throw in the room function. Now, if we go to this route, you can guess it. It's just going to return back that call. So we can go to / room. And I accidentally added in an extra parameter. And there we go. So we have a room and we have a home page. So views trigger, or URLs trigger views, and that's what the user gets back in return. That's going to be an HTTP response, that's going to be a template, or when we're setting up our API, it's going to be a JSON response. So this isn't the best practice. If we create a really big project, it would be really messy to have all our views here and our URL patterns, because there's going to be a lot of logic in these views. There's going to be a lot of functionality, and this is going to get really messy. And this is why Django creates apps for us, and they give us a structure to separate all of our code. So let's go ahead and take these two views. We'll copy those. We'll remove them. I'll remove HTTP response, save that, and then let's go into our app, which is base, and let's go to views.py. So in views.py, we are going to paste in the home page or the home view and this room view right here. Now, this isn't going to work. So we have our functions right here, and this file doesn't know how to call those. So what we're going to do is we're going into our app, and we're going to create a URLs file just for this app. Remember, if our project gets really big, we're going to have different apps. So we want a URLs file just to handle all the routing for this app. So let's create a urls.py file. So this will be our app URLs file, and this will be our root directories URLs file. So this is going to be for a full project. This is going to be for a specific app. So in here, let's go ahead and make a quick import. So we first want to import the path function. That's what triggers these URLs right here. So we'll actually remove them, and we want to make this import. So from django.urls, let's import path. So from django.urls, import path. So we have the path function, and in here, because the views are going to be in their own file, they're in the same folder. So we see views and URLs. Let's go ahead and go into that file. So we'll do from dot, and then we'll import views. Okay, so now we need a list called URL patterns, and we're going to specify all the URL paths that a user can go to. So we're just going to go ahead and go to URL patterns, or add URL patterns, set that to a Python list, and we're going to set the routes here. So we're going to use the path function right here, and the path function can take in 3 parameters at this point. So we're going to specify the direct path. So for the home page, it's going to be an empty string. We can leave it like that. Then we need to go into the views file here. So we're going into views, and we need to get the home view. So we'll do views.home, and then we can actually give our view a name, and we'll talk about why this is good later, but we're just going to call this home. So later on, we can actually reference a view or a specific URL by its name. So that's going to be convenient, and it's going to make things more dynamic. So we have our home page, and we also want a room page. So we'll just do room / and we'll do views.room. And we also want to give it a name. So we'll just go ahead and do room. And there we go. So we always want to add in a closing comma there and make sure that's correct. And now we have our 2 views, which we also need to import HTTP response, because that's going to give us an error. So from django.http, import HTTP response. Okay, so that error is going to go away. And look at this. So we have 2 views and we have 2 URLs. And if I go to the page here, so let's go to the home page and let's check this out. If I click on this, we're going to get an error. So what's happening here is we have not configured our URLs to the app's URLs file. So what's happening is we have all these URLs and we see some kind of error. Let's actually fix this first. So we have home. What's going on here? Maybe I didn't save the root URLs file here. So let's try that one more time. We'll save this one, and we're going to save this one. So it looks like everything should be good now. Let's try that one more time. So we'll go to the website, and now we have the default Django template that Django already has prepped for us. So what's happening here is we have 2 URLs, but Django does not know about these. So we need to go back to our URLs file, and we're going to include or import a function called include. And then we're going to tell Django, when we go to the website, this file is going to handle all the core URL routing. But instead of adding all the URLs in here, we're going to create a path here. And this is going to be an empty string. So every URL that matches an empty string, go ahead and use the include function. So we'll do include and send the user to base and then URLs. So we're going to the base app and we're going to the URLs file. So let this URLs file take care of all the routing. So the user is going to go to this page, it's going to match this route, then it's going to go to this URLs file, and these routes will be matched. So I hope that makes sense. So now if I go back here, it's going to remove the default Django template, and now we can go to room. So it's actually a lot faster than that. Typically, I'm just doing a lot of explaining, but we just configured all of our URLs and our views, and now we're ready to render out some real templates. So let's talk about templates. So we have simple HTTP responses, and these aren't dynamic. We can't add our own HTML to that. There is a way to do it, but it's going to be very messy. So let's go ahead and add our templates. So in order to add templates, we're just going to go into our main project files here, and let's just go ahead and add in a new folder. So we're just going to add in a folder called templates, and this is where we're going to store our templates. And there's a few ways to configure these, so we'll talk about that in a second here. So we'll go ahead and pay attention to the file path. So now it's in the same directory as the app. So in here, let's create a template called home.html. So now we can actually write some HTML code, and we won't worry about the HTML semantics just yet. So we'll add in an h1 tag, and we'll say home template, and that's going to be it for now. And we also want to add in a room.html, and we'll just do h1, and we can do room template. So now we can actually add in markup instead of rendering out a simple response. We have two templates, and we need to return these inside of our views. Now, the first thing we need to do is let Django know about this templates folder. It doesn't know that this exists yet. So we're going back into our main project folder in settings.py, and we need to go into templates here. And this is where we're going to let Django know that we have a new folder for our templates, and it's going to tell it where to look. So we're going to use a variable called base dir, that stands for base directory, and it's set right here. And this just sets the file path back to the base directory of our project. So it basically goes all the way back there so we can access any folder from that area. And we'll go back to templates. So we'll set base dir, and we can just do / and then we'll just do templates. So we're saying go back into the base directory and find the templates folder. And now Django knows we have templates in this specific folder. So in order to reference these templates, we need to go back to our views. We can actually get rid of our HTTP response. So at this point, we can use the render method. So this is imported by default, and the render method takes in 2 parameters that are needed and then 1 optional here at this point. And the first one is going to be the request object. So that's going to be the HTTP request. We need to pass that into render. This is how we pass data back and forth. And then we're just going to specify the template name. In this case, it's going to be home.html. Now I can also do that for the room here. So we'll just go ahead and do render, pass in request, and we'll just do room.html. So that's how we know about the templates. Now if we go back here, we see the room template and we see the home template. So now we actually render the templates and we can do a little bit more with it. So let's go ahead and remove the HTTP response. And I want to talk about template inheritance. Now, just rendering a template isn't the best thing if we're maybe adding in like a navigation bar. Imagine having to code in the navigation bar into every single template, adding in all those tags, all the styling, and then if we change out one link in the navigation bar, we're going to need to go back to all the templates and update every single template. So there's something called template inheritance, and we can also include sections of templates inside of other templates. So let me show you what I mean by this. So we're going back into the templates folder, and we're going to create a file just to contain our nav bar. So this is going to be our navigation bar, and we're going to call this navigation. And all we're going to do here is create a link here. And this is going to be a link to the home page, like a logo. So we'll just say href. That's going to send the user back to the home page. We'll just direct it to a / and then we'll just say h1 and we'll say logo. So imagine this is our website logo, and we just want to add in an h1 tag here. So we'll just do h1, or not an h1 tag, but just an hr. So like a line break. And this will be our ugly navigation bar until we fix this. So this code needs to be seen on every single page. So what we could do is we can simply go into our home.html page, and we can use a template tag. And don't worry about these curly braces and percent symbols. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. So we can use these, and at this point use 2 curly braces and 2 percent symbols, and then write in include. So we're going to add in include, and then in single quotes we're just going to say nav bar.html. So we're going to include this template inside of this template right here. So if I go to the home page, if I refresh that, now we see this logo. Now, if I go back to, or if I go to the room, we don't have it. So what I could do is just take the same template tag and I can move that to room and simply include it in the top section here. So I can refresh that. Now we have a home page and the logo up there. We have the full navigation bar, and we can include this multiple times. So we can do something like this, and that's just going to add it in all throughout our template. Okay, so we need to go to room for that. I think I did that in the room page, and there we go. So now we see that navigation bar. So we're including sections of templates. Now, what we could do is we can also talk about template inheritance. So instead of including it, what we could do here is go ahead and create a main template. So we'll do main.html. And this is going to allow us to create like a wrapper around all our templates. So every single template that we have, by default, our application is going to have different styles or a main theme and then different styles per page. And we want to be able to simply include like one style tag and little sections into our main theme of our website. And we want that to be displayed all over and simply encapsulate all the templates in our project. So let's go ahead and in main.html, let's start typing out HTML. And most text editors, if you start typing that out, it's going to give you the boilerplate HTML. If not, you're just going to have to write all this out. It's just a doc type, 2 HTML tags, a body tag, an opening and closing tag, and a head tag with some metadata. So let's go ahead and give it a title. So we'll just do study bud. And let's go ahead and remove the JavaScript file. We don't want that at this point. And we also don't need the CSS file because we don't have one yet. So we have our main template, and this is the template that we want to inherit from, or all the other templates to inherit from at this point. So in the body tag, what we need to do is we need to create these things called tags. And again, we'll talk about this syntax in a second, but let's go ahead and create a block. So we'll do block, and then we'll say content. And then we're going to need to close this block tag. So we'll just do end block. So what this is going to do is it's going to tell our website where to add all these child templates when we wrap a parent or another template in our website. So in our homepage, we're going to have our main page, and then all the homepage content will be in here. Then when we go to our room page, all that content is going to be inside of these 2 tags. So it's in a sense just wrapping that content. So what this is doing for us right here is instead of having to include this navigation bar in home and then inside of our room page, I'm just going to copy this, remove it, and then add this into main.html. So I want this at the top of my page inside of every page. So I'm adding that above my block tags. And now we have our main template, and I can go into home here and I can simply extend that template. So instead of include, we're going to use these tags here, and we're just going to do extends, and we're just telling it which template are we extending. So we're extending main.html. Now, in order for this content to be seen, we need to use these 2 tags right here. So inside of main.html, we need to specify where this content is inside of our template. So we're just going to say block content, and then we're just going to do end block like that. And then we'll just do content. Okay, so now not much is going to change. We're still going to see our navigation bar, but the nav bar is no longer inside of this template. We're no longer having to add it to every template, even though that was pretty simple to do. We just want to be able to add it to our main template, and that's it. We need it there once, and that's going to be good for us. So if I go in here, we'll refresh it. The room doesn't have the main parent template yet, but the home page does. So we see that the nav bar is inside of the main template, and we see the home template underneath it. Now let's go ahead and add this to our room.html. So you might be using Django just to create APIs. So if you're not worried about the template syntax, in theory, you could just go to databases and not worry about this, but a lot of people still use the Django templating engine. So we're going to stick to that for now and make sure that we cover it. So we'll just do extends here, and we can go into main.html. We're specifying the template that we're extending, and then we need to wrap the child content. So we'll just do block content, and we can do end block. Okay, so the nav bar is now only inside of main.html, but if I go to room, there we go. We see the room template and the home template. So that is including and extending a main template. So let's go ahead and actually pass in some data into the template. So how do we pass in data when we query a database? So first of all, I want to talk about the Django templating engine here. So Django actually uses its own templating engine. It looks like Jinja. So let's just do Django. Wow, I can't spell. So Django template engine. And let's talk about tags here. So first of all, I just want to point out two main ones. We can add in variables. So inside of our template, we can pass in variables, any kind of data. And in order to do this, we just add in two opening and closing curly braces around the variable, and that's going to pass in the dynamic data. So if my first name is, and then whatever first name was, that's going to get passed in the template, and then last name. So variables are simply two curly braces. Now, we also have tags here. So there's different types of tags, and this is basically a way of passing in Python-like logic into a template. So at some point, we might have to, or we will have to loop through data and pass out like a list of rooms or users that we want to display. And these tags are simply a curly brace with a percent symbol like you saw. So there's different types of tags. So we can create for loops, if and else statements, and so on. So we can add in a lot of logic. So imagine that we have a user and we want to change like a hello message. So in this case, we're going to check if the user is authenticated, go ahead and render the username, and then we have to close the end if statement. So in Python, you just have to write if. In the templating engine, we have to close that if statement. So we have different types of tags and filters and so on. So just think double curly brace or curly brace with percent symbols, and we're going to work with a lot of built-in templates. So that's what we saw here. We're using like the include tag or the extends tag, and we're using those tags to add in dynamic data. So those are Django template tags there. We'll address those as we go. And at this point, let's go ahead and go into our view. So imagine that we have a view here that has some data. So at some point, we're actually going to render some rooms. So let's create a variable, and this will be a Python list. And we're going to have some rooms which will just be dictionaries, or they'll represent like objects. And each room will have an ID. So we'll just have an ID, and we'll start at 1, and then we'll just have a name to that room. And for this first one, let's just say, let's learn Python. So our room is going to be people posting these kind of requests. So we'll do let's learn Python, add in a closing comma after that, and let's just copy and paste this a couple times. And we'll just do 2 and 3 here. Okay, so for the next one, we'll just give it a name. I just want to make sure that we have something here. So we'll just do design with me. And then we'll just do front-end developers. So these are like Discord servers, I guess. So front-end developers. Okay, so we want to be able to render this data out inside of the template. So inside of home.html. So let's close out the nav bar. We'll close out room and main and settings. And we want to render this out. So at this point, what we could do is go ahead and take rooms right here. So we have a variable. It's outside of the function, but it is accessible here. And we can simply pass in a dictionary and specify the value name. So it's a key value pair. We can add in as many as we want. And we specify how we want to address it in the template. And then we specify what we're passing in. So if I save that, now we have access to this list right here inside of the template. So this is passed into home.html. So we'll go into home, and let's go ahead and just render this out. So we'll just create some kind of div for our main page. And let's create a div that renders out all these items here. So we'll just do 2 curly braces. So we're creating a for loop. So this is going to allow us to create it with a tag here. And we'll just say for room in rooms. And the difference here in regular Python and in this templating engine syntax here, we'll just do end for. So we have to close it instead of just closing out or just writing a simple for loop. So we have to always close our for loops and our if statements. Now on each iteration, what do we want to do here? So I'm just going to create a div, and if I can type this out, let's go ahead and on each iteration, we want to pass in some kind of tag here. Let's just do an h5 tag, and we want to pass in the ID. So variables can be passed in with 2 curly braces, and we can just do room. So we're getting the room object on each iteration, and we're just doing .id, and then we'll just do 2 hyphens, and then we want to pass in the room name. So we'll just do room.name. So we're accessing the dictionary's names right here, or key value pairs. So if I save this, we can go ahead and refresh it, and there we go. So as I add data, we can render that out. So we pass that through the view and into the template. Now we could just pass it in directly like this. I like to create a context dictionary, so you can call it whatever you want. I just call it context, and I set that value right here, and then I pass that in as the third parameter into the render function. So that passes in the data. Now if I want to create an if-else statement, I can go ahead and do that. So we can say something like age or something like that, and then we can say if the age is a certain number, render this out. If not, render something else out, and that's how it would work. So we'll actually see that in practice, so I won't show that in the demo, and I want to go ahead and show you a few more things with the templates here. So we created a templates folder for all the templates inside of our application. Now in the future, as I mentioned, we have different apps that handle different parts of our website. And what I like to do here is create a templates folder that represents every single template that is going to be available throughout the application or is not specific to a part of our app here. So in this case, main is going to be available everywhere in our application, and so is the nav bar. Now, home and room are going to be specific to the base app. Now, if this was a bigger application, this would be an app probably called users and then rooms or something like that. We would separate it, but for now, let's go ahead and create a new folder inside of our app. So I'm showing you 2 different ways to do templates, and I guess the reason to why you would separate them. So we'll create a new folder and we'll call this templates. Now the weird thing about this is that Django requires us to create another folder inside of this templates folder. So if I go ahead and do new folder, we're going to call this base. So it has to be named whatever your app is called. So if you call your app something else, make sure you have the app name, which is base, templates, and then inside of templates, a folder with your app name. In this case, it's base. So it's a weird structure. It's kind of confusing at first to some people, but there's a reason to why it's like this. Now, inside of the templates folder, inside of base, we're just going to go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call this home.html. And we're just going to go into the home templates here from the root directory and just copy all of this and paste that into this new home.html file. So we're just going to go ahead and delete home.html from the root directories templates folder. And in order to actually work with this new template, all we need to do is go into the view, and we need to specify the app now before and then /. So Django tells us to do things this way, so let's make sure that template is connected. So if I refresh it, we're all good. And at this point, instead of deleting the content, we'll just go into the application. We'll go into the templates folder, and we're going to copy room. We'll go into our app, into templates, base, and we're going to paste that in here. And then we'll go into the root directories templates folder, and we'll go into room and delete that. So don't let that confuse you. It's just this weird prefix stuff that Django does, and they do it for a reason. But there we go. So now in order for room to work, we need to go into base /room. So our app templates are inside of our app folder, and our main templates are inside of the root templates folder. Okay, so now I also want to talk about dynamic URL routing. So how do we get a specific object of a single room here? So for example, let's say I want to link this up here. I want to be able to click on this and then see information about a specific room. So at this point, the room really has no way of doing that. And the way we're actually going to set this up is by changing up the URL here. So what we can do is pass in a dynamic value here. So we're going to use 2 angle brackets, and we're going to say str for a string, and we're going to pass in a value name. So pk is going to be for primary key or ID. It really doesn't matter. Now, this value could be an int, so an integer, or a slug, but a lot of people do like to actually have string values. I like to use it. So in this case, I'm just going to do str, even though I'm using a integer here. So we're passing in the ID into the URL. Now, inside of the view, we need to pass in another parameter here. So I can pass in pk right here. So now I have access to whatever value is inside of that parameter inside of the room here. So If I go ahead and save this, before I actually render the value out, now I can actually go to room. Let's go ahead and do room and then /1. So now this will work. So I can pass in a dynamic value and that'll change. So let's go ahead and go back to our main page and let's finish this up. So from our home page, I'm just going to add in a link here. So around each H5 tag, we'll add in an A tag. And we're just going to wrap this. So we'll make all of this clickable. Actually, let's just make the room ID clickable, or the room name. So we only want to wrap one section because later on I do want to add in more links. So we're just going to do href and then we'll go into /room / and then we're going to pass in the variable of the room ID. So we'll just do room.id like that. And then later on we're actually going to update this URL too. So we pass in the URL. It's going to go ahead and set this value and pass in that value into the ID here. So if I refresh it, I can click on this. We see the room ID. If I go to 3, we're seeing that value. Okay, so in order to actually get this value, later on we'll actually use this primary key to query the database. But for now, we're just going to use this variable, and let's go ahead and actually write in this logic here. So we're just going to set a value here, and we'll just call this room, set that to none. So when we first go to it, it's not going to have a room. Then we're just going to loop through the rooms value. So we'll do for I in rooms, so that list of objects or dictionaries, and we'll say if I, and then because it's a dictionary, we have to access the values this way. So if I.id is equal to, let's see, pk, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that's an integer. So we'll wrap that because I believe it might be a string, so this might not match. So if we find the current room, so we're going to go ahead and loop through this list here. We're checking all the IDs. Whatever ID matches that primary key that's in the URL, we're just going to go ahead, find it, and we're just going to say room is equal to I. Then what we can do is simply set a context dictionary. So we'll do context, and that needs to be a Python dictionary, and we'll just say room, and we'll throw in room here. So we'll bring in context as the third parameter. Make sure you add that in right here, paste that in, and that should give us our room here. So now in the template, we can pass in the value into the room here. So let's just say, we'll pass in a title, I guess. We'll just do room.name. Because that's passed into the template, we can access it this way. That's going to be the H1 tag. So let's go to Let's Learn Python. There we go. It finds it. And we see front-end developers and design with me. So we're able to get the values. Now, I want to show you how to get dynamic values from our templates here. So let's go ahead and change this up a little bit. So there's a reason why we added in a URL name here. So let's say that at some point we change this to room page or something like that. Like we want to update it. What's going to happen is we're going to have to go into every single template or anywhere that we access this URL here, and we're going to have to update all these values, and that's going to be really annoying. So what we can do here is we can update that value all we want, but we can specify or access this value by the name. So if this value doesn't change, then we don't have to update anything. So we can keep this as room name or room, it doesn't matter, but as long as this value is the same, we can keep accessing it that way, and it's just going to point to this URL here. So let's go into the home page. And instead of specifying the path here, so we're not having to update it, we're going to use the URL tag. So it's a built-in tag into the Django templating, or inside of the Django templating engine. And we're going to specify the tag name, so URL, and then make sure that if you're using double quotes out here, you're using single quotes out here. And if you're using single quotes out here, you're using double quotes in here. So inside of URL, we're passing in the URL name. So that's this value. And we can pass in the dynamic value, so the room ID. I just want to make sure that I'm not covering that. We're just going to pass in room.id. So make sure that's outside of these quotes, but still in the URL tag. Now, if I save this, we can go ahead and refresh it, and that's going to work here. So that tag is just going to simply generate the URL based on that tag. So we don't write it out that way, but that's how it's seen because we have the tag name. So now if we happen to change that URL path, we don't have to go ahead and update everything. So it's really convenient, and it's much faster to deal with things that way. So we just worked with setting up our application. We talked about views and URLs, and we worked with templates. We rendered some data out in the templates, And now what we want to do is actually set up a real database, which is going to be in our SQLite database. And we want to actually query the database and render data from the database out here. So we don't want to use this anymore. So let's go ahead and prep that. So at this point, we have our SQLite database. It's not prepped, it's just sitting there. It's an empty file, and we want to work with that. So if I open this up here, we see this alert and it says we have 18 unapplied migrations in our application. Now, inside of settings.py, we have apps in our project. So apps are simply, again, different parts of our application. And a lot of these apps have database sections. So basically we have like a database prepped. So we already have a couple of tables that are ready to be migrated. Like Django builds out a user table for us. For authentication, they already build out a table to store session IDs, like if a user's logged in. So we have all these tables that Django has already prepped for us. Now, what happens is Django creates these migrations, and these are basically like SQL commands prepped and are ready to be executed. So they're ready to be activated, but they haven't been triggered yet. So once I run these migrations, these commands are going to be activated, and they're going to build out all these tables, which are inside of here. So we have sessions and then a couple of different items in here, and those tables are going to be built out. So we don't even have to configure these. Django is really good at setting this up for us and making this easy. Now, we are still going to build out our own tables, but these are just the default ones that Django gives us. So all we need to do is run python manage.py migrate. So it's going to execute these commands. So we're going to see all these migrations being applied. And basically what just happened is that built out our database for us. So it executed those commands. And now if I run my server, so we'll do python manage.py run server. So if we activate this, now we're no longer seeing those unapplied migrations. So the migrations that we had ready are officially applied and they're ready to go. So we want to add in our own tables, and we'll see a few of those tables already. We're going to have something called a Django admin panel that lets us view our database because we're not using like a production database. There are some plugins and extensions that let you view the SQLite database, like the actual tables, but we don't really care about that. We're going to stick to the admin panel. And later on, if we want to use something like Postgres, we can use PG admin, some kind of interface to actually view all the tables and the rows and all the items inside of that database. So let's go ahead and close out settings here. We'll close out room.html. I guess we'll close everything. And inside of our app here, so the base app, let's go ahead and go into models.py. So models.py is where we're going to create our database tables. Now I do have a picture that shows you a representation of what a model is going to do. So I'll just go ahead and find that and then explain it here. So I pulled up some pictures from that full Django course, and let's see, we want to work with models here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create Python classes. Now, the class that we create is going to represent the database table. So in this example, let's say we had a project. This would create a table in the database called projects now, or project. Now, every single attribute inside of that Python class would represent a column inside of the database. So we would have an ID, we would have a title and a description. Now, every single time we create a new row in that table, that would be like an instance of a class, and that's going to add in the row. So the table name or the class name is the table name. The attributes are the columns. So this is what it's going to create. It's a replication. It's in a sense a model of a table. That's why they're called models. So this concept is not specific to Django. I've seen this in other frameworks here. So it's nothing new as far as the style. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first table we want to create is going to be our table for our room. Or actually, yeah, we want to create a room first. So we'll create a class here, and we're going to create a room, and I'm going to capitalize the R. That's the tradition for classes. And we're going to inherit from models. So this is what's going to change it from a standard Python class to an actual Django model. So we're going into models.model, and model is with a capital M. So there's going to be different attributes here. The first one is going to be the host, like the actual user that's going to be connected. Until we work with that, I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. We're also going to have a topic. Until we add that, I'm going to comment that out. And we are also going to have a name. So this value I will add. So we're going into models.char field. So it's a character field. and this is simply a text field. So I have to specify the attribute and what type of value is that attribute. So at this point, the character field takes in the value of max length, or it needs this parameter. This is something that is required for this value. Now we can also add in a description. So we'll just go ahead and do description. So we'll do description here, and this is going to be models.text field. So it's the same thing as a character field. In this case, it's just going to be a bigger text field. And what I want to do here is I want to specify a value of null, and I'm going to set that to true. So by default, null is set to false. So if I don't set it to true, like a name here, it's set to false here. What this means is that the database cannot have an instance of this model here without this value having something in it. So it can't be blank. Now, if I set null to true, it means that it can be blank. So it's saying null is allowed, so it's true. Now, we also have a parameter called blank here. And what this means is that when we run the save method, like when we submit a form, that form can also be empty. So we're going to set that to true. So this is for the save method. So when we're adding a form, and this is for the database. So we're going to make sure these two values can be left blank. Maybe someone created a room and they didn't add a description. They want to add it later. We want to let them do that, and we'll just allow them to update that later. So we have a room, or we have a name and description, and we also want to add in later participants. So participants, I can never spell this name. I have to like sound it out in my head, so I had to be quiet there. So we'll just do participants. I'm going to comment that out. So what that's going to do is store all the users that are currently active in a room. So if you comment in a room, you are now a participant, like in a Discord server. You get to join one, and we are going to add in an updated value. So this is going to take a snapshot of any time this model instance was updated. So anytime we run the save method to update this model or this specific table or the item, it's going to take a timestamp. So in this case, we're doing models.date time field. So we want the date and the time that it happened. And we're going to do auto underscore now, and this is going to be set to true. So that means every time the save method is called, go ahead and take a timestamp. We don't actually have to add in any value. It's going to do it itself. Django already has that built in. Now we also want to know when this was created. So we're going to do created, and this will be models.date time field. So it's the same thing as updated. And in this case, we're going to set auto underscore now, and we're going to do auto now add. Excuse me one second. So we're going to do auto now add, and we're going to set that to true. So the difference between auto now and auto now add is auto now takes a snapshot on every time we save this item right here. Now, auto now add only takes a timestamp when we first save or create this instance. So if we save it multiple times, this value will never change. It'll just be the initial timestamp, whereas updated with auto now is going to take a timestamp every single time. And that's going to be very useful depending on how you want to organize and display data. So we want to know when a room was created and maybe every time it was updated and when the last time it was updated. So that's going to be it for our room model at this point. And we're going to create a string representation of this room. So we're going to do str, and we're going to pass in self here. So it's a Python class. You should know this if you know Python. And we're just going to return back, let's see, we'll just do self.name. So this does have to be a string value. So if you do a date or try to concatenate values or any numbers, make sure you wrap around the string method like that. So at this point, name is going to be just like that, and we're always going to require it. So it should be good, and we're ready to go. So when we add a model, we're going to add a few more here. So when we add a model to the database, the first thing we need to do is make migrations. So we have this migrations folder, and what it's going to do essentially is basically create a file that's going to have like a list of SQL commands and how to execute this and add it to the database. So we already migrated our database, so we executed built-in migrations, and now we are making new migrations. So we're just going to do Python manage.py make migrations. So it's one word. So if I hit enter, we're going to see a new file here. A new file or a new migration is going to get generated every single time. So right now it's 001. Next migration, you're going to see another migration get created. So here we go. We see this class right here, and it's basically showing all the migrations that we're going to apply and what to add to the database. So it's kind of like a staging area before we actually update the database. So once we make a migration, you're going to have to do this every single time. So make migrations and then Python. Let's see what's going on here. Let's clear it. So we'll do Python manage.py migrate. So migrate will go into the latest migrations and it will execute those. And then we're going to see these migrations being applied. So we see apply all migrations, and it's applying this migrations file, which is base 001 right there. So it applied those, and now that table is in the database. Now, let's say we want to view this. So because we're not adding in any third-party package to work with that SQLite database, we're going to use the built-in Django admin panel. So if I go in here into the URLs file, so we'll go into StudyBud, into the root directories. If you go to this file right here, now that we have a database, you can go to that URL and see the built-in Django admin panel. So we'll go to port 8000. If you haven't saved that as a tab, go ahead and do that, or just write that in. And we'll go to /admin. So here we have an admin panel, and Django already has built-in authentication for us. And in order to log in, we need a user, and this user specifically has to have admin level permission. So we're just going to create this from the command prompt here. So we'll generate that user, and then we'll make sure that we can actually see this data. So let's just go ahead and run Python manage, and then we'll just do .py create super user. So it's all one word. And by default, it's going to follow the computer name here, or whatever my username is on the computer. I'll just add in Dennis, and then we'll just do dennis@email.com, and we'll specify some kind of password. So as you're typing it, it will start filling out, but it won't see it. So I'm typing it and you don't see it. That's for security reasons. And there we go. So the password was created, or the user was added to the database. Now my server is still on, so I have two different terminals open. And now I can go to the admin panel, and it already has the password saved here. I have dummy passwords I use for tutorials. So we'll go ahead and click login. By the way, is my face blocking the terminal? Okay, good. Just thought I might be blocking it. So go ahead and add in the user credentials that you just made with that command. So we'll log in, and here we go. So if I go into this admin panel, we are able to work with the database and actually see what we have at this point. So we have a groups table. We also have a users table, which shows us the user that we just created. We could add new users, so I can go ahead and create a user, add in the password, and that'll generate a new user. So I can actually deal with CRUD operations right now. Now, I do want to build these into my own application, so I typically don't use this in a production environment. I build out my own interface. But if you want to go ahead and start working with the database right away, it's really good for getting set up really quick. So we added in the room table here, but we don't see it. And the reason for this is that we technically don't have to use the admin panel. So in order to actually see these, what we need to do is go into admin.py inside of your base app, whatever you called it. And let's first import our models. So they're in the same file path. So we'll go into from.models, and we're just going to import room. Now we need to register this model with the admin panel, and we're basically saying to the admin panel that we want to be able to view this item and also work with it in the built-in admin panel. So we'll just do admin.site.register. So we're registering it with the admin panel, and we want to specify the model that we want to register. So we'll throw that in. Now if I refresh it, now we see rooms. If I go in here, we see 0 rooms. I can go to add room. And let's see, let's learn JavaScript like that. We'll add in a few here. I'll also add in a description. So we'll just do lorem ipsum. Just Google this up, grab some dummy text here, some kind of description to a room, paste that in. So I can also delete, I can save. Now we see that's added to the database. We'll add in a new one, and let's just do 100 days of code challenge. And we'll just grab some more lorem ipsum text here. So click the dang calendar, and there we go. So we have 2 items inside of that room table here. So now we added those, we're able to work with the CRUD operations, and we want to be able to render these out inside of the list and also view the details. So we added those to the admin panel. Now we want to see those here. This is still that Python dictionary. So let's go ahead and update this. So we have the model now inside of the view here. I'm just going to go ahead and actually I'll comment this out in a second. So before I do that, we'll just do from .models. So we're in the same file path. Views and models are right here. And we're just going to import room. So first we import the model that we want to query. Now there is something called a model manager. So I'm going to set a value here. We're just going to do rooms, and we can make queries by going into the model. So we'll just do room, and then we have a model manager called objects right here. So I want to show you one more picture. I guess I'll show you two. So I also talked about this in the full course, and this is how we can make queries to the database here. So let me move this picture because my face is kind of blocking it, or I'll just shrink down the circle here. So we have a variable, we have a model name, so in our case it's room. Then we go into the objects model manager, so we do .objects, and then we can specify what we want to get. So if we do .all, it's going to query all the models or all the items inside of that database table. So we specify the method. Now there's a lot of methods here. We have get, we also have filter, which lets us filter data down. We'll work with that. We can also do exclude, and that's going to filter items out in like a reverse order. So get right here is to get a single object, whereas all and filter are to get multiple. So this is how it's going to work. And if I open up this picture right here, there's a whole type or a whole list of query sets and how they work. So it's basically the same file you just saw right here, except for this is how we're passing in values. So we can filter by a specific attribute. We can change up like greater than, less than filters. So there's a lot that we can do with it. We can also order values by different attributes and so on. And we have different methods that we can call on these objects. So that's all covered in more detail in the full course. So we'll go ahead and close that out, and we'll just see it in practice. So let's go ahead and expand this a little bit. So I think it's right here. I'm trying to see where my mouse is. So I think that should be good. All right, so, okay, for some reason the mouse is not being recorded. Okay, so let's just go ahead and work with it and see how this works. So we have our rooms. We're going into rooms.objects, and then we'll just do .all. So that's going to give us all the rooms in the database. Now, in this case, this variable is the same as this one, but it's going to override it. In 1 second, let me try to fix this because my mouse is not showing. So I'll pause it and get back to it. Okay, so I just turned off my computer. I had to restart everything, and for some reason the mouse is still not showing up. So it shows up in these sections right here and anywhere up here, but as I scroll down, it just disappears. So if I need to show something, I'll try to highlight it. I might have to fix some in editing, maybe to point something out if you don't see it, but I'll try to maybe emphasize what exactly I'm pointing at. So that's kind of annoying. I have no idea why it's doing that, but we're just gonna move on here. So at this point, now that I've restarted my computer, so we want to just kind of recap a few things here, and we have this query for our rooms here. So we're querying the rooms, it's overriding this variable, and now we're actually going to the database. So we just imported it, and that's what's being passed into the template. So now if I go ahead and go in here, and if I refresh it, now we're going to see the items from the database. So we see the admin panel as opposed to that list of dictionaries. Now if I click on these, it technically is still going to work if your IDs start with 1 or 2, because those are inside of that dictionary. And that's one thing that I forgot to mention, is that models by default have an ID generated for them. So the ID value just starts at 1 and it increments in the database as the instances go on. So we could override this value. You could just specify the ID and then use something like a UUID field or something more advanced. That is something that I like to do in my projects, but for now, we're just going to stick to the number value and just use integers. So we have those IDs, and we want to do the same for the specific room. So let's go ahead and actually comment this out. I'll probably leave this in for this course for the source code so you can see that. And in the room, let's just get rid of all of this, and let's just get the specific room. So we'll just do room, and that's going to be equal to models, or the model name. So we're doing room.objects. So the model manager, and then we're doing .get, which is going to return back one single item. So we need to get this by a unique value, because if this value, let's say we have 2 items with the same value, like a name or something like that, it's going to throw an error because it needs to get back a single object. So in this case, we're going to specify the value that we want to get it by. IDs should be unique. You should never have a duplicate ID in the database in a table. And we're just going to pass in the primary key. So if I save this, let's go ahead and refresh it, click on 100 days of code. Now we see that. So when we go to this page, it goes to that view, queries the database, gets back that single item, and then it renders it in the table. So the names are all the same, so we didn't have to change any logic in the front end, and now it's all working well here. So at this point, we want to add in a few more models to the database. So we have rooms here, but each room should have some kind of category. So we want to bring that in. So we'll go ahead and set this up here. So let's go ahead and start with a new model, and we're going to call this, let's see, actually I want to start with a comment or a message. So each room is going to have a message, and I'm going to put that beneath here. So we're going to do message, and we're going into models dot model like that. So we're making this a model, and for the values for an actual message, first we want to specify a user, so the user that's sending the message, and we're going to build this in a second. Then we want to specify the room, and this is a relationship here. So this is going to be the first type of database relationship that I'm going to talk about. This is a one-to-many relationship. I go into more detail in the course about this in the full Django 2021 course, but we have a many-to-one relationship. So in this case, that means you have one model that has many children. So imagine this is Twitter, where you have a user, and that user can make multiple tweets, so multiple posts. So that post can only have one user, but the user can have multiple posts. So one-to-many or many-to-one, and in the database, they identify each other by the IDs. So we'll close this out and let's build this in. In order to create a many-to-one or a one-to-many relationship, we specify the attribute, so that's going to be the room, and we can do models.foreign key, and in here we specify the parent name. So in this case, it's going to be connected to the room. So that is what's going to establish the relationship in the database, and that's how we know what's connected to what. So in here, we're just going to specify a value here. We're going to do on_delete. This is something that we do with many-to-one relationships. And we have a few options here. So the first one is we can do model or models.set. I believe it's models. Yeah, models.set_null. And this means that when the parent is deleted, so imagine that someone deletes this room. What do we want to do with all the children here? So all the instances of the children, so all the messages. We could set it to null, which would mean that that message would still stay in the database, or we could do cascade, which is what I want to do here. So when a room is deleted, I want to cascade. So that means that we are simply going to delete all the messages in that room. So if a room gets deleted, all the children will also get deleted. So we just want to get rid of those. Now you can decide how you want to use that, but in this case, I'm just going to keep it that way. So we're going to set that to cascade. Now, let's see, after the room, we also want the body, so the actual message. In this case, we're going to do models.text field, and we're just going to leave it like that because we do want to force a user to write a message. They shouldn't be allowed to write a message if they don't have a value. And let's see, we'll just take updated and created and bring that in here. So we'll do updated, created. We'll create the string version. So we'll do a function, str, pass it in self. And for the return method, we'll just take in the body. So we'll do return self.body. And in this case, we're going to trim it down, and we only want the first 50 characters. Now, in the preview, we want the first 50 characters, so that way, if that's a long message, we don't want all the content in it cluttering our Django admin panel. So we have the message value, and we created a relationship. And in here, we also want to add in a user. So Django already builds in a user model for us, and this is something that we're going to address a little bit more in the last part of this video, but we're going to start with a default user model. So let's just Google this up really quick, and it looks like I have a spelling error. So Django already has a built-in user model, and by the way, I open up the Figma design so we can start following this once we start adding in the items. So we'll just do Django user model. And let's look at this. So this is in the Django documentation, and the user model is simply a class. It has things like a username, first name, last name, email, password, different permissions like is this user a staff member, is it active, Is this a super user? When's the last time this user logged in, and so on. So we can use this value, and we can also import the user. So we're just going to look up the import method. I guess it's not in this file. So I'm just going to go ahead and import this manually. So we're going to import this user into the file and create a relationship. So in here, we're just going to do from django.contrib. So this is a different part of Django here, .auth, and we're going to import user. So the user with a capital U, and that's what Django already has built into the admin panel. So we're going into auth.model. So it's a model. Okay, so again, later on, we're going to customize this, and there's a few reasons for why I'm doing it this way without building it in right away. And let's take this user model and let's set the relationship. So in this case, this is going to be a one-to-many relationship. So a user can have many messages, whereas a message can only have one user. So we're just going to do models.foreign key. We already know how to set this. We're going to paste in the user, and on delete, when a user is deleted, we just want to delete all the children here. So we're going to do models.cascade. Okay, so we have a room relationship and a user, and now we want to go up to room, and in this case, because a room is going to be a child of a topic, I want to specify the class above it. So we're just going to do class here, and we'll create it as topic. This is going to be models.model, and we're just going to add in one attribute here. So all the topic is going to have is a name, and this is going to be a character field. So we'll do models.char field, and we need to specify the max length. So this field does require it. There's no need for a topic to have more than 200 characters. And we'll set the string value, underscore, pass in self, and we'll just return. And that's going to be the name, self.name. So we need to access that value. Okay, so now we want to specify the relationship to the room. So a topic can have multiple rooms, whereas a room can only have one topic. Now we can change that up to a different type of relationship, but for now, a room can only have one topic. So in this case, let's just take this field right here. Let's bring that into room, and we're going to paste that in. So it's going to be models.foreign key, and we're going to connect that to topic. Now, because topic is placed above room in the code, if we happen to bring topic down here somewhere, we can still access this inside of this value, but we would have to wrap that in a string like that. But for now, we specify the topic, so the actual value. And if a topic is deleted, let's see, what do we want to do with the room? Now, in this case, I don't want to delete the room. We'll just do set underscore null. Now, that might cause some issues in our code later. We can add in some fixes for that, but let's see. Okay, so we're seeing a warning right now, and this basically is saying that if this value is set null, that means that in the database, we have to allow it to be true. So we have to allow it to be empty, because when it gets removed and set to null, we need to make sure that the database will allow it. Now for the host, we need to set the user. So I'm going to copy this value, paste this in, and that's going to freak out here and throw an error. We're just going to take this user. I don't know why that got imported. So we're going to take that user and then change this value. So I'm pointing at it right now. I guess I can't see that in the code, but I'll highlight it. We can see the user here. So on line 15. So now we have a relationship to a host. So somebody has to host the room, and then a topic, which is right here. Okay, so what do we do after we add in two models? Well, we're going to go through that same process that we went through earlier, and we are going to have to open up a new terminal here. And we'll just do Python manage.py make migration. So we're going to prep the migration. So when I execute that inside of the migrations folder, now we're going to see a second migrations file get prepped. It's going to prep the migrations for any changes or any new tables. So anytime you make a change to a model, specifically to an attribute, or add in a new one, we need to run that, and then we need to execute that. So Python manage.py migrate. Okay, so we're going to execute that, and that's going to add it to the database. And after we run those migrations, we need to register these models with the admin panel. So we're going into here, and we're going to add in topic and message. Now the user model is already registered by default, so let's just go ahead and do admin admin.site.register, register the topic, and then admin.site.register, and this is going to be the message. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this out. So we'll go in here, go into the admin panel. If I refresh it, now we see topics and rooms. So we'll go to a topic. Let's go ahead and add a few. So we'll just add in Python, and let's add in Django. Let's see, we'll just do developer or web development. So we want to do something more generic. So we'll give users plenty of options, and at some point you want to customize this, go ahead and give users the option of adding their own topics, and let's just do JavaScript. Okay, so we have 4 topics. So what we can do is now go to our rooms, and in the rooms, because we added that the host and the topic value, you're going to see this drop-down menu, and you're going to be able to add in some users. So for the topic, 100 days of code, let's just do web development. So that's how many-to-one relationships are displayed in forums. And we can also add in a host. So I'm going to specify that as Dennis. We're going to go ahead and save this. So I'll shrink down my face here just to make sure we can see that. And let's add that to Let's Learn JavaScript. So we'll do Dennis, and then I guess we'll do JavaScript for the topic, and we'll hit save. Okay, so I'll expand that a little bit, and now that should be good. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure you can see me clicking that save method. So now that we added that, we also want to add in some messages. So let's just go ahead and add in a user, and let's just chat inside of the Let's Learn JavaScript room. We'll just say, hey, and we'll submit that. So now I'm clicking the save button, or I guess I can do save and add another. And let me actually add in a user, and I'm going to call this user Tim. We'll add in the password, and we'll do password confirmation. Save that. So now we have 2 users, and the password is by default hashed. So Django takes care of all that. So now we can see 2 users, and we'll add in another message, and Tim will say hi. So we'll just do hey, hi, and that should be good. We'll save it. And I just want to make sure those are all to the same room. So messages, hi is Let's Learn JavaScript, and hey is Let's Learn JavaScript. Okay, so we added 2 messages and we added some topics. So we just made some connections there, and let's go ahead and update this section here. So let's see, how do we want to render this out here? So we want to go ahead and actually render out the user value. So we'll go into the template, and let's go into home right now, and let's check out the design here. So in the design, we want to render out the username, and we also want to render out the topic. So it's not going to look this good yet. We haven't added the template yet, but I just want to display more information. So we'll go in here. Let's see, down inside of the div here, let's just add in a span tag. So we'll do span, and then we'll just do @ and then later on this will actually be clickable, so we can actually go to a specific user account here. So we'll do @ and then we'll go into room.host, so we can actually query upwards to the parent item instead of just an attribute. So the model does have a value called host, so we can actually go to the host object, and then we'll just do host.username. So we can do that with Django, and that should display the host name. So if I refresh that, now we can see Dennis posted those. Let's go ahead and go down here. Let's add in some kind of line break so we can actually see the difference. So we'll do an HR tag, and let's just do small, and we'll add in the actual topic here. So in this case, we'll just do room.topic.name. Save that, and let's take a look. So there we go. That looks a little better. So I can actually click on this, and later on we'll just display the actual room information. So we're done with rendering out the items. I showed you how to query the database for multiple objects, a single object, and also how to render this stuff out inside of the template, like rendering out a parent or 2 parents here, and just working with that data and also the admin panel. So now what I want to do is show you CRUD operations. So this stands for create, read, update, and delete. It's the core of any functionality on a website. You're going to want to view data. That's the detail. You're going to want to update. That's the UN CRUD, read this information, and delete this. So Let's go ahead and add that. So we want to learn how to work with a database outside of using the Django admin panel. So in order to do this, the first thing I'm going to do here is create a form for a room. So we're going into the apps templates folder. So in templates, inside of base, and let's create a template for a room here. So we're just going to go ahead and do room_form.html. So we're going to create a template that is going to represent a form for updating and creating a room. So one template for two different views. Now, sorry about the weird breathing there, almost like choked on air. So the first thing we're going to do is do extends, and we're going to extend the main template, so main.html, and we're going to wrap all the content. So we want to inherit from that main template. This is what we just worked on, and we're going to specify the content block, and then we're going to do end block content. So end block content. Okay, so in this page, let's go ahead and create a div here. So I want to wrap the main page, even though we're not styling it. I want to create a form. And in the form, we need to specify the method. So we are going to be sending data. So this is going to be a post method for creating and updating. And the action, well, if I don't specify the action, it's going to send it to the current URL that we're at. So I could send it to a specific URL, or I can just say, when we hit post, send it to the same URL, except for now send post data instead of get data. Now, inside of every form in Django, if we're using this templating engine, we need to add in a CSRF_token. So this token will be sent on every form submit. So when we're sending post request in Django, we need to pass in this token, and this is going to send it just to make sure that there's no malicious attempts. This is helping us from cross-site forgery attacks. I believe that's the term for it. If I got that wrong, sorry. So we're just sending that token along with every request, and it's making sure that the user didn't try to do anything malicious with that and I guess mess with our form input. So now we also want a submit button. So we're going to specify the type here, and we're going to say submit, and the value is going to be submit. So I'm going to make that lowercase. So that's the value or the type, and then the value, the actual text in that button will say submit. So we have a form, and now we can go back to our view here, and let's go ahead and create that view for this. So we're going to create the function, and we're going to say create room. Pass in request here, and inside of or after request, let's just go ahead and do return, and this is going to render out request. Okay, so you can see everything. Just want to make sure. And for the template, we're going into base, and we're going into room_form.html. So we're just rendering out the template, and we're going to pass in context, which we don't have yet. So we'll add that right here. So I'm just doing some prep work, some boilerplate stuff, and we'll pass in the empty dictionary. So I'll save that. We render out the template. Now we need to create a URL here. So we'll just do path, add in a new route, and this is going to be create room / the view is going to be or views.create room. Name will be create-room. Okay, so we have our URL. We have a view that renders a template, and let's just go ahead and link this up. So let's go into our home.html page, and this is where a user can create a room from. So at this point, just above all our rooms, let's just add in some kind of value here, and we'll just add in a link. So we'll just say create room, and let's just do href, and the value will just go to that URL. So we're going to use the URL tag, and the name of the URL, that's what we want to access. That's going to be create-room. So we just highlighted that so you can see it, and we're doing create-room. Okay, so let's check this out. So the form is not ready yet, but if I click on it, I should be able to see the template. Let's see, on line 3, content inside of create room. Where is that? So room form extends main.html content. Oh, this is supposed to be block content. So it's the block and then the block name. So I just got that wrong. If I refresh that, There we go. Okay, so I could manually create this form and then submit that to the backend. Now, Django has different ways of going about this. Now, if we have class-based views, it's all built in already for us. We really don't even have to do much. We just submit it and it kind of just processes that magically. And now that's also why I don't like class-based views, especially for beginners, because they're hard for people to understand. They're easy to use in basic structures, but once you need to customize something or to understand how it actually works, it's hard to make sense of it. So they're useful when you know them. They're really good. For now, we're going to use function-based views. And for this, instead of writing out that form manually, we're going to use something called a model form. Now, there is a layer of abstraction to this where there's kind of some magic under the hood, but it's easier to understand than a class-based view. So let's go ahead and build out a model form. So a model form is like a class-based representation of a form. So we'll just start this and I'll explain what's happening. So let's go ahead and create a new file inside of our base app here. And we're going to call this forms.py. Now, inside of our forms.py file, first we're going to import our model form. So we're going to do from django.forms, and then we're just going to import model form. So there's different types of forms we can create. So let's go ahead and import our models really quick. We'll just do from .models, so it's in the same file. Let's just import room. Okay, so we have our model form and we have our room. Now, all we do to create a model form is we create a class, and the tradition here that I like to use is specify the model name and then form. So this is going to be the form for the room, so I call it room form, and this is going to inherit from model form here. Okay, now there are two minimum values that we need here. So when we set the metadata here, we're going to specify the model that we want to create a form for. So that's going to be the room model, and we have to specify the field. So we could do fields like this. And what this is going to do is this will create the form based on the data, or the metadata of this room right here. So that means that it's going to create this form field for us, which will be that drop-down list, the topic value. It'll create a text field for our name and then the description, and then updated and created. Well, those won't show because those aren't editable fields. So it's creating a form based around these values. So if I specify all here, it's going to give me all those fields. Now, later on, I am going to want to hide values like the user, because that should be just auto-generated, like the logged in user that creates it. The application should know. A user shouldn't be able to specify who they are necessarily in a drop-down menu. So later on, we're going to say things like give us the name, then give us the body of the form, and so on. So it's just a list, and we can also add values that we want to exclude. So for now, we're going to leave that as all. So we're creating a form. Now inside of our view, we're going to import that form. So we're going to do from .forms. So it's in the same file path. Let's import room form. I'm kind of losing my voice here, so let's see how long I can record today. So we have the room form, and inside of create room, we're just going to do form. That's going to be room form after we import that, and we can render this out in the template. So we're going to render that out as form. It's in the context here, and we can pass that into room form HTML. So in here, we pass in a variable, and we'll just do form because that's how we passed it into the context dictionary. If I refresh that, look at what we have here. So we have this form with all these field values. Now we're going to work on styling this and making this look a little bit better. But for now, we're going to use a quick shortcut, and we're just going to do form.as_p. What that's going to do is it'll wrap a paragraph tag around every input field that the form has, and it'll just render those out. Now in the Django course, the full Django course that I have, I do talk about customization, and we do work a lot with this. So if you really want to see how to modify this form, we go into depth there. So now this form looks a little bit better. We see the submit button, and we're good to go. So what we need to do now is process this data. So if I go back to this view, we'll go to form, and we'll just say if request dot method. So remember, method is, or request is an object. So we'll do if request dot method is equal to post. So we'll just do post like that. Then let's go ahead and print out the form value. So we'll just do, or the value that was sent. So we'll just do request.post, and that's going to be all the data. So if you want to look into request, look up the Django documentation, and it's going to show you that in detail here. So let's just print this out. So if I go ahead and minimize this, I guess, we'll add in some data. We'll specify Dennis as the host, Django as the topic, and we'll just say, let's learn. Okay, so if I submit this data, I'm going to print out what we send to the backend. So this is just going to be like a dictionary of key value pairs that's sent to the backend. So if I submit it, let's see, I can do submit like that. And here we go. So we see the dictionary, we see the CSRF token, we see the host with the host ID, the topic ID, the name, which is let's learn right there. I want to make sure that's not hidden. And then the description, which is empty at this point, and so on. So this data is sent. So what I could do is I could process all of this manually. So I could do something like request.post.get and then get me the name, and then extract all those values and then run the save method on the model. But in this case, we have a model form that takes care of all this logic for us. So all we have to do is take in this form. So we're just going to do, let's see, how do I want to process this? So we're just going to take in the data. So we're going to specify the form, and we'll just do room form. Then we're going to pass in request.post. So it's passing in all the post data into the form. So the form already knows which values to extract from that. And then we can check if form.is_valid. So these are all methods that the form does have. So if it's valid data, if there's nothing wrong with it, they all match, the types of values are correct, we can just do form.save. That's it. So we're going to save that value, and this is going to save that model in the database. So once that's saved, I want to redirect the user back to the home page. So we're just going to add in or import a value called redirect. So redirect, save that, and let's bring that down here. So if the form is good, we'll just do return redirect, and we're just going to send the user to the home page. So again, because I have the name in the URL, I can access it by the name instead of this value here. So that's what makes that name value so cool. So let's go ahead and check this out. So we have a form, we send the post data, add the data to the form, check if it's valid. If it's good, we save it, and then we redirect a user. So let's try this out again. So we'll go back to the home page. We'll go to create a room, specify Tim as the creator. We'll do web development, and we'll just say, I want to learn HTML. This person's a complete noob. And let's just, I guess we don't need to add a description. We'll submit that. So now I see I want to learn HTML down here. So it's at the bottom. So that value was submitted, and now we have a create method. Now, before we get into update, I want to change something here. So I could actually go to the model and render out new items first here. So when someone adds something to the database, I want to make sure the newest item is first. So we'll go into models here, and there's a couple of ways of doing this. One is we can actually add this to the query set, or we can add it directly to the model method here. So let's go ahead and add this in. We'll just do class meta. And we can specify ordering. So there's different values that we can set, and this is going to be a list. So what's going to happen here is the first items in this list are going to be prioritized, and then it's going to chain on that way. So what I'm going to do here is order the value by updated, so the most recently updated value, and then we're just going to order it by created. Okay, so if I do dash, so here's what's going to happen. So if I do this, like if I do the value like this, it's going to order it in ascending order. So that means the newest one will be last. So if I go here, if I refresh it, it didn't really change much here. Now, if I want the newest updated item to be first, I could just reverse that. So I can just do a dash, and that's going to invert it, and we'll do that for created. So if I save that, now the most newest updated item will be first. So I want to learn HTML. We'll just do Dennis now, Django, test, add it, and test is right there. So now it goes in the reverse order. So that's ordering. So now let's go ahead and go into updating a room. So to update this, we already have a template. So we have this template that submits that post form or the post request. Now we need to create a view. So we're going to create a new view and we're going to call this update room. So it's going to look a lot like the create room method with a few changes here. So we're going to pass in request here. Then after request, we also need to pass in the primary key. So we need to know what item are we updating. Then what we want to do here is get the item that we're going to update. So in this case, we're going to update the room. That's going to be room.objects.get. We're going to get this value by the ID. So that's going to be the primary key. Then we need to add in the form. So let's actually quickly add in the return method. So return render, we pass in request. If this is getting repetitive, that's good. It means you're understanding it. And we'll go into base. Let's get these notes out of here. I don't know why that's doing that or all that extra stuff. So we'll do room underscore form.html, and then we'll pass in context, and we'll set the context dictionary. Okay, so we get the room, then we get the form. So we're going to do form. This is a lot like the method up here. So let's just copy and paste that. Now, the only difference is when we click to edit a room, we want to be able to actually know what room we're going to edit. So this is going to give us an empty form that we're going to render in the context dictionary. So how do we get that data pre-filled? Now, what we can do here is we can actually add in instance or initial. So we can add in initial and we can pass in the room value. So I just want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. I have some notes that I'm looking at, and that's going to be instance. Okay, so we pass in the instance, so this form will be pre-filled with this room value. Now, if the values don't match, then that's not going to work. But now we have a form that's pre-filled. So before we actually submit this, let's go ahead and add in an edit value. So we'll go into, we'll go into our home.html page. And let's go ahead and add in an edit button. So we'll just add this somewhere here. Let's just add it at the top here. So we'll just do a link here, so a tag. And we'll say edit. Later we'll add a delete button, so we'll just throw in href. And the URL, which we didn't create, so we want to create that first. The URL is going to be like create room. And in this case, we're going to change this to update. And then this will be update room and then update room for the name. So we're going to access it by this value here. So update room. In home, we're just going to do URL for the URL tag, and then we can do update dash room, and then we need to pass in the ID. So this URL right here does need an ID, so we're going to go ahead and throw that in. So 2 angle brackets with a closing /, we'll do str, and then we'll pass in PK. So in the view, we do need that ID, so that's looking good. Inside of home, we need to pass in the actual room ID. So on each iteration, we get the room, and I can throw in the ID as that parameter. So a little bit of boilerplate there, and let's check that out. So we see edit here, so I can click on that. So let's say I want to edit one of these, we'll edit learn, or I want to learn HTML. I click on that, and that data is now pre-filled. So we see that information. Now we need to process this. So it's also going to look a lot like this right here. So we'll specify the method here. So we'll just do if request dot method, if this is equal to post, so if it's a post method, then what we want to do is get the form. We'll just do room form, and as we're processing this, what we're going to do is pass in the request.post, so the post method, all that data, but we need to tell it which room to update, because if we process this information, it's just going to go ahead and add in a new room. So we need to tell it what room to update. In this case, we're going to set the instance just like we did above, and that's going to be this room value. So we specify that here and down here. So this data is going to go ahead and replace whatever that room value is. So now the rest here is easy. We just do if form.is_valid. If that's valid, let's save it, form.save, and let's just do return redirect. Send the user back to the home page. All right, so let's try this out. We'll go back here, go to the home page. Let's say we want to edit test. Now those lines are a little bit close here, but we're going to click edit, and we're just going to do updated. We're going to save this value. And here we go. We see test updated, and that value is now updated. So I can click on it and see that here. So that is update functionality. So we have create, update, and we want to close this out with delete, at least the CRUD functionality. So let's go ahead and finish this up. So first, what I'm going to do is add in a new link here. So we'll go into the edit button. We'll change this to delete. And until we add in the URL tag, I'm just going to go ahead and clear that so we don't have any issues here. So now we're going to see a delete link. So we have edit and delete. And for this, let's see, how do we want to handle this? Now, if a user goes here, we need to send a post method. So we're going to create another template just to handle deleting. So inside of our app here, inside of the templates base folder, we're going to create a new file and we're going to call this delete.html. Now, this is going to be a dynamic template, meaning that later on when we go to delete a comment, it's going to be the same template to delete any item inside of our website. So we're going to make this pretty generic. It's just going to extend from the main template. So we'll just do extends here. And all it is going to be a confirmation. So you click on it, it's going to say, are you sure you want to delete? And then whatever item we're deleting. Then we have a back button that we can click, or we can click on confirm and actually delete that item. So we're going to extend main.html, and let's go ahead and do block content. So repetitive stuff here, we're just wrapping all the content. So we have our styling and our navigation bar later on here. So we'll do end block and then content. And let's see, so we're going to add in a form. This form needs to send a post request. The action, well, we're going to leave that as an empty string. It's going to send it to the same URL here. We do need to pass in a CSRF token because we are sending a post request. So CSRF_token. And let's just go ahead and ask a question. So in the form, we'll just say, are you sure you want to delete? And then the item. So are you sure you want to delete? And then in quotes, we're going to pass this in as OBJ like that, or object. Let's just do that. Actually, we'll just say OBJ. So OBJ is going to be short for object and then a question mark. So we're not going to say room because later on when it's a message, this will have to be message. So we're going to pass that in. Then down here, we're going to add in an input button. The type will be submit. So this is going to submit the form. And again, we'll add styling so it'll look a lot better once this is complete. So the submit button here, and let's see, for the value, I just want to say confirm. Okay, so we're going to confirm the delete, or we can just use an A tag here and we'll just say go back here. So let's see, how do we want to do this section? So I want to make sure that the user goes back to the previous page, because if they click on the delete button from a post, it's going to send them back to the post page if we manually set that URL. But what if they clicked on it from a message? So we want to be able to redirect the user back to the previous page, not a specific page that they're on. So inside of delete, what we could do is just add in href, and we can actually access the request object directly inside of the template. So we can do request.meta. So we have some data about all the URLs, and we're going to do http_refer like that. So that's going to send the user to where they came from. So let's go ahead and check this out. So we have the template. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. We ask a question, and then we are going to have two buttons here, or I guess two links. So now that we have the template, let's go into URLs here, or into the views, and we're just going to add in a delete view. So we'll do delete, or a function, delete. This will be room. Pass in the request object, and then we're going to return that template. So we'll do return, render, pass in request here, and we're going into base/delete.html. Now, I'm not going to create the context dictionary, or I'm not going to actually specify the variable. We'll just add this in here. And here's what we'll do. So we're going to pass this in. So you access it in the template by the name of the key. So whatever we named it here. So we're going to call it OBJ, and then this will be the actual room. So the room will be called object in the template. So that's why we did that. And now we can go ahead and get that value. So we're going to pass in the primary key. We want to know which room are we deleting. First of all, we want to get the room. So we'll do room.objects room.get. That is going to be the ID value by the primary key. So we pass that primary key in, and then we're going to check the method here. So we're going to do if request.post or if request.method is equal to post, so in a string value. What do we want to do here? So in this case, we're going to do room.delete. So there's a lot of different methods. We have the save method. There's, I guess, different things. I'm not going to go through the list of them. But delete is simply going to remove that item from the database and delete it. So if it's a post method, that means we click confirm. That's submitting that form, and it's deleting the room. So let's go ahead and save that. And then where do we want to redirect the user? So we'll just do redirect or return redirect. And we're going to send the user back to the home page if they deleted that room. All right, so let's go ahead and check this out. So we're missing the URL here. So we're going to copy this one, paste that in, and we're just going to do delete room. This is going to be updated to delete room and then delete for the name. So we have the URL, we have the view, we have the template. Now inside of the home template, we need to add in the URL tag to send a user there. So we're going to do URL in single quotes. We're going to do delete-room. That's not going to delete the user or the room. It's going to send the user to the confirmation page. So the room ID, we'll pass that in. And let's check this out. So if I refresh this, click on delete. Let's try this. Let's learn JavaScript. So are you sure you want to delete Let's Learn JavaScript? So we could go back and it doesn't do anything. So it just sends us back to the last page. Let's delete test updated. And if we click confirm, now we see that that's gone here. So we don't see test updated anymore. Let's try to delete. Let's see, I guess we deleted it. We know it's working. So we sent that method, it removed it from the database and it sent us back. So that is the delete method. So at this point, I want to build in some search functionality into our application here. So I want to do two things here. The first one is to go ahead and build in like a sidebar here. So this is that Figma design, so it's not active. This is going to be some quick search functionality, which means that we can render out all the topics that we have here. And a user can simply click on one of these and it's going to filter down by topics. So that's going to throw this into like the search parameters and these rooms will be filtered. Now, after we have that in the search bar here, so if I go too close to that, it's going to go ahead and hover over there, but you see that search bar. We're going to add that in so a user can also type in a certain parameter based on a topic or the actual title of a room, or maybe even buy some contents in that specific room. So we want to add in some beginner functionality here, and then we'll actually advance that as we go through this section. So what we'll do here first is we're actually going to add some styling here. Now, as far as the styling goes, it's going to be very minimalistic. So don't worry about the CSS if you don't understand it. We're going to add in only a couple of lines here. Once we do that, we're actually going to add in the template that's going to make this look better here. So let's go ahead and build this in to start. So we're going back to home.html. And the first thing I want to do is make sure the entire page is wrapped in a div here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that in a div. And we're going to give this the class of home-container. So we're going to have to use CSS grids for this. Again, don't worry if you don't know how they work. We're going to just type it out here and it's going to be very minimalistic. And inside of this home container, we want to create a div here for our sidebar. So this is going to be the sidebar that says browse topics here. So we're just going to go ahead and add that in here. So we'll just do an h3 tag and we're going to say browse. Wow, we can't spell browse. So browse topics. Okay, so that's going to be our sidebar. We'll just add in some kind of HR tag there, so a line. And then we also want to wrap all of this right here. So all the rooms, we want to wrap that in a div here. So we're just going to go ahead and take everything from this link down to this div, and we're going to paste that into this container. So we're about to have two columns. One, we have a main container around everything. Then we have a container around our topics and a container around that list of rooms. So let's go ahead and check this out here. So if I refresh it, they're all in line. So we want to create some layouts here. So we'll go ahead and add in some styling right here. So we'll just add in a style tag and we're going to take that home container. So we're going to get that class home-container and let's wrap this. So we're just going to go ahead and create a grid. So we'll just do display grid. And we're going to do grid template columns, and we're going to do one FR and then 3FR. So that's going to stand for 1 fraction and 3 fractions. So technically we created 2 columns, and this is specifying how many fractions of the website or the page that this is going to take up. So don't worry about the details. Go ahead and create this and make sure you have 2 columns here. So if I save this, this column on the right should be wider. So if I refresh that, there we go. So we see our topics on the left side, and then this section is taking up 3 fractions. Now, what I want to do is list out all the topics here. So we're going to go to this view, and we're first going to go ahead and make a quick query for all the topics. So we need to go to our models, and we need to import these. So this will be the first type of search that we do. And we're just going to do topics, and this is going to be topic.objects.all. Now, for now, we're just going to list out everything, but if we start adding in thousands of topics into our website, we want to maybe filter these down by just the top topics, or maybe the topics with the most rooms, but we'll leave that up to you to figure that out here. So that needs to be topics. We want to make that plural. We're going to throw that into the context dictionary. Whoops, we'll just type that out. So we'll do topics, and we'll just do topics right here. Okay. So we have all of our topics, and we want to render these out in the home page. So we just want to go ahead and loop through all the topics. So we'll do for topic in topics, and we're going to create that closing loop. So we'll just do end for, not form. And in each iteration, we're going to create a wrapper. And in here, for now, we're just going to do a link here. So we'll add in a link, and this is going to be the topic name. So we want to be able to visibly display it. And then what we're going to do is add in a link. Now this link, so we're going to use the URL tag. 1 second here. So we'll do href. Inside of this link, we're going to send the user back to the home page. So the URL is going to the home page, except for outside of this curly brace, we're going to add in a question mark. Then we're going to pass in the parameter name. So that's going to be Q, and we're going to represent query. So it can be whatever you want. And we're going to set that to equals to, and then that's going to be the topic name. So we'll just do topic.name. And here we just want to also list out the name. I want to make sure you can see that. So the topic.name, and there we go. So what's going to happen here is we're going to the same page when we're in this sidebar. So we're going to click on this. It's going to send the user to the home page, and we're throwing in the topic name. Now, if I go ahead and refresh this, when we click on that, that's going to be added to these parameters right here. So we can see Python. If I go to Django, web development, JavaScript, that's going to be added in the parameters, and we can get this value right here inside of the view here. So we're going to get that value and use that to filter down some data here. Okay, so now that we have that, I also want to make sure that when we're filtering this down, I can also refresh the filter and go back to get all the values. So in this case, we're going back to the main URL, and we're just going to specify all. So if I go ahead and refresh that, so if I go to Python and then Django and then back to all, it just gets rid of that, and we're back on the home page. So in the view, for the actual functionality, we can use the filter method. So if I don't do anything here, it's going to work just like the all method. It's just going to go ahead and get back all the rooms because we haven't added any parameters. Now what I'm going to do here is create a variable, and this is going to be Q, and Q is going to be equal to request.get, so the get method, and then we're going to use the get function here, and we're going to get Q here. So Q is going to be equal to whatever we passed into the URL. Now, what I could do is just go ahead and go into the topic, so I can go to the model and get the topic, and then I can actually query upwards, so to the parent, so double underscore, and then say topic name is equal to Q. Now we're going to get a couple issues here, so if I save this, let's check this out here. So it's going to filter this value down, and we should get back this data. So on the first search, we have an issue here, and that is because we don't have any parameters here, and none of the parameters fully match the specific topic that we're looking for, so it just gives us back nothing. But if we go to JavaScript, we can see JavaScript. If we go to web development, we can see back 2 results here. So we need to create some kind of condition here. So the first thing is we're going to use an inline if statement. So we're going to check if the request method has something, and we're going to say if request.get, and then we're getting Q. So if Q is not equal to none, then we're going to go ahead and make sure Q is the parameter. Else, we can say Q right here, Q is going to be equal to an empty string. So we'll throw that in here. And instead of setting the value directly, because at this point it's just going to set it to nothing, if we have nothing and the filter still won't work, we can use a value called _I contains. Well, the value is actually just I contains, not _, but that's how we have to add that in. So what this means is that it's going to make sure that whatever value we have in the topic name at least contains what's in here. So that means that let's say we start typing out a specific value like Python, and we only add in py into the search parameter. So it's going to see that it contains at least those 2 letters, and then it'll run that filter, and that will return a positive match. Now, the I there just means that we can make that case insensitive. So that means that if it's a capital P or a lowercase one, it won't make a difference. We also could do contains like that, and that will be case sensitive. Now, there's also other options like starts with, ends with, and so on. So there's different opportunities here, but we're going to leave it at that. So let's try this one more time. We'll go ahead and clear that. And here we go. So we get back everything. So that means that we don't have a parameter, and technically all of these topic names match that. Now, if I go ahead and go to JavaScript, web development, that still works. And I also could manually start typing this in and say WE and go ahead and search that. And that'll work because we see web development and that matches this query. Now, we want to add in an actual search bar. So you see how I did this manually where I just added in that search? Well, we don't want a user doing that, and we also want a user to be able to do that from their own search bar. So they don't want to have to manually do that or be limited to these links right here. So what if a user wants to search by a specific name, or maybe by somebody that created the room? Let's say you have a favorite room creator or a host, and you want to be able to find them. So you can say something like, go ahead and find me all rooms made by Dennis. So you'll type in my name and it would display those. So we're about to make this dynamic. So in the header bar here, so we're going back to the nav bar, let's go ahead and create a search form. So just underneath the link right there, we'll create a form here. And this form is going to go ahead and set the method to get, and the default method is get, so we technically don't have to set that. And the action, well, this is going to send the user to the home page. So we're specifying the URL that's going to the home page. And then we want to add in the input field. We don't need a CSRF token because this is a get method. The type here is going to be submit. So we'll add in submit, and then the value, well, we're not actually going to have a submit form. I just realized I would rather have the user just hit enter rather than clicking a button. So let's just do this. We'll specify the type as text. So this will actually be the input field, but I do have to give this a name. So we'll specify the name as Q. So it's going to take whatever we have here and throw it into that URL with Q before that. So that's all we need at this point. So now what we can do is actually run that search. So just before I do that, I actually want to add in a placeholder, and we'll just say search rooms. So we want to prompt the user, and that'll be ... and let's make that a capital R. So we're going to search the rooms. Let's check this out here. So if we go back up here, we're going to see this filter here. So that's in the nav bar. So that means that if I'm on another page here, it will take me back here. So let's try this. Let's go ahead and search for JavaScript rooms. So we'll just do Java, and then we'll start typing in script, but we won't finish it. If I hit search, now it's going to match this right here. And there we go. Now, if I'm inside of a different room, let's say I go to, let's go to view a room, and I start typing in Java like that, or JAV, it's going to go back to the home page, and that filter works. Now, I want to show you one more thing here, and that is how we can make dynamic values here, or dynamic searches. So at this point, we're only searching by the topic name. And I mentioned earlier, we want to search by a name of a user or a room and so on. And technically we could chain these filters down here. So we could say something like comma there, and then we'll just add in, let's see, we'll do name of the room. So now we have name that's going to the room, and we can say the room or the name contains whatever value. Now, the only issue with this is that means this search parameter has to match everything. Now, we do have a method, it's called a QLOOKUP method that Django gives us. And this is going to allow us to add in things like and, or statements into that search. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So let's add this above here, and we're just going to make a quick import. So we're going to do from Django dot, let's see, where are we getting this from? We'll do .db, .models, and then we're going to import Q, and that's going to be a capital Q. Now with Q, we can actually wrap these search parameters. So we're going to add in a capital Q, add in the parentheses, and then we can go ahead and just chain this. So I'm going to fix some indentation here, and I can add in an AND statement. So I can do AND, and then go ahead and write in Q down here. So we'll do Q, and we'll just say name underscore I contains, and then we'll throw in the search parameter. Now the only issue here is that both of the values here have to contain that, so I can actually do an OR statement. So I can add in a pipe, and that means OR. So that means the search parameter has to match this one or this one. So I can throw in one more. We'll copy and paste that actually. And let's see, let's go by description. So we'll do description. So description contains the search parameter. So we'll close out that closing one there, and that's it. So now we can search by 3 different values. So if I go here, let's go ahead and clear this. What just happened here? I contains, it looks like I misspelled contains somewhere. Okay, so we need to fix that, and let's go back here, refresh that. Okay, so name double underscore, and then this one has to be a double underscore. Okay, now that should work. So if I refresh it, still supported contains. Okay, I just have a bunch of misspells. 1 second, contains. So description, I contains. Name, I contains. That should be good. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so what if we don't want to search by the topic? We want to search by a title. So we'll just start typing in I wanna. Let's say we only remember like the start of a room name, but we don't remember the full name here. So we can click that right there. And there we go. So we can search by the room name, and then later on, if I add in a user, we can search by the user. So that's it for the search functionality. I just want to throw in one more thing here, and I want to be able to get the room count here. So the actual count of how many rooms we have here. So if we go back to the Figma design, we see study rooms, and then we can see total rooms found near you. In our case, I'm going to change that up a little bit. I actually don't like how that looks. So we'll go ahead and do something like this. So we'll go into the home container, and we'll take the container for the feed here. Just above our create room link, we'll go ahead and add in H5, and we'll just do, let's see, we'll just do room underscore count. So we're going to pass this in a second, and we'll just say blank rooms available. Like that. Okay. So in the view, we need to pass this in. So we'll just go ahead and take this room here. So these are going to be filtered down. And in Django, we can just go ahead and do room underscore count, and then we can get rooms. So a room count is equal to rooms.count. Now in Python, you could use the len method and just wrap that, and that's going to give you the length of a list. In this case, we get the length of a query set, and this actually works faster than the Python len method, or len. So we're going to do that. We'll pass that in. And let's check this out here. So if I go ahead and refresh that, now we see we have 1 room available. If I clear all of those, we see 3 rooms. So as a user searches, we see 2 rooms available for this topic right here. And that's exactly how we wanted it to be. So we always see the room count. Now we're going to talk about authentication. So at this point, I'm going to build in a user login form, user registration, and also log out functionality. Now, before we get into this, I want to talk about how Django deals with this. So Django by default has session-based authentications, and how this works is it's the same as what we have in this Django admin panel. So when we go to this admin panel, when we provide our credentials, this gets sent to the backend, and in the backend, there is a database table called sessions here. So if we go to installed apps inside of settings.py, let's see, we'll do settings here. We see our sessions here, and if you go and actually use something like pgadmin and Postgres, you'll be able to see this table. So when a user logs in, this is sent to the backend, and a session token is created, and this stores information about a user. So once that user is authenticated, we now know when this user logged in, who this user is, and all this information about them. So at this point, let's go ahead and do inspect element, and we're going into application, and then we're going to go into cookies here. So depending on what browser you use, it's going to look a little bit different, but we want to go into cookies. So we're going to clear these ones out right here, and we're going to log this user in. So that session will get created in the database, and then we're also going to take that session and we're going to store it in the browser. Now, as we navigate through pages on our website, we don't have to keep logging in. That session is going to be stored, and on each request, it's going to be sent to the backend, and we're going to check, is this user actually someone that's in this website? Are they allowed to be here? Are they authenticated? And what permissions do they have? So if I hit enter here, so if I submit this login form, we're going to see a session get created. I don't know what the heck happened. Okay, so I removed the CSRF token, so that's going to be there by default. Django does that for us. So we're going to hit login, and look at this. So I'm logged in now, and I see this session ID. So here's the value here, is this token right here. So I want to make sure you can see that. And this is now stored inside of the cookies here in the browser. So we went into application and then cookies. On each request, we double check this session, or Django will take care of that, and then it lets me persist here. So it lets me go through all the pages. Like when I go to this next page, we quickly check the session, and it made sure, hey, this person's allowed to be here. So Django has that built in by default. And what we're going to do is we're going to build this in ourselves. So we're going to use that authentication system, and we're going to log users in here. So let's go ahead and close out the admin panel, because we don't want users to have to use that. We want to have our own authentication. So for this, let's go ahead and start by building out a template, and we're going to call this registration login. So we'll just do login underscore registration, or register. So login register.html. So we're going to have one template for a login and register form, and then the form itself will change based on what page the user's on, whether they're logging in or trying to register. So we're going to go ahead and do some boilerplate here. I accidentally hit caps lock. We'll just do extends here, and we're going to extend main.html. Trying to type faster and I start messing up here. We need to create the block tags. We've done this a lot, so we'll just do block content and then close that off here, and we'll just do end block content. Okay, so in here, I'm gonna create a div here. So I wanna wrap the entire website. So we'll do div, and it looks like I missed something here. And now let's go ahead and create a form here. So this is going to be our login form. Now Django does have a built-in login form. There's different ways of doing this, and they also have a built-in registration form. What I'm going to do here is just use my own login form. It's going to have two fields of a username and password. Later on, we're going to talk about doing this with an email instead of a username, and we're just going to submit it. Now for the register form, that will just be generated for us. So the method here, well, this has to be a post method. We're going to send data back to our view. And the action, well, we're going to leave that as an empty string. And we need to add in a CSRF underscore token. Okay, so now for the input value, we want to go ahead and tell the user to log in. So the type will be submit. And then the actual value, well, we're just going to say log in. And let's create the two fields here. So we're going to create an input field. This one is going to be the type of, let's see, text here. So that's going to be the username. The value is going to be username. So we need to know the name of the field when it's submitted. And we'll just say placeholder, enter user name here. Okay, I also want to add in a label here. So we'll just do label, and we'll just say user name, and we'll throw that in. And let's just copy this right here. We'll add this down here. So label is going to be password. And let me turn off the fan really quick. It's actually getting cold. Just wanted to turn that off. I'm freezing in here. Okay, so add in a password. The type is going to be a password field, and this is going to make sure that there's the dots instead of actually displaying the value. And then the value itself will be password. So we want to be able to get these in the back end and then enter password. Okay, so we have our form. We just have a simple form, no styling here, and extends the main template. Now inside of our views here, we're going back into the views, and we're going to create a view for this login page. So let's go ahead and add this above our home page. So it's kind of like the first step in this process, and I'm going to call this login page. Now do not call this view login, because we have a function that we're about to use. It's a built-in function called login, and there's going to be a conflict if you use that name. So try to do something else. In this case, I'm just going to call it login page. You can call it login view, just not login on its own. So we'll go ahead and return that template, render, and we'll throw in the request object, render that template. So that's going to go into base, and we're going to get login underscore register .html. And let's go ahead and actually pass in the context dictionary, and we'll create that in a second. So context set that up here. Okay, so we need a URL now. So we'll go ahead and put that up here. So we'll put that at the start and add in the closing comma. And this is going to be login, the closing / and then views.login page. Now the name, we'll just do login like that, and that's going to work here. So leaving the name like that, it's good. That works here. And at this point, I want to, let's see, I want to render this link at the inside of the navigation bar. So we'll just go ahead and bring this in. Let's see, we'll just do this above the, or just after the form. Let's just do this right here. So we'll add in a link here, and this is going to be to log in, and the URL is going to point to login here. So we'll add in the URL tag here, and we're going to the login page. Okay, so let's check this out here. So we see login. If I click on that, that's going to take me to the login page. I see the username. Not sure why that's the case. Enter username, I guess. Okay, so I just used that value. Let me double check why that's happening. That looks a little bit odd. So the value is username, and okay, so this needs to be the name actually. Sorry, not the value. I don't know why I did that. That's an issue right there. So now I see the username. So if I remove that, there we go. Okay, so we have the form, and now we want to be able to log in a user. So at this point, when we send this information, we need to extract these values. So earlier on, we did a model form, or we used a model form for this, and that kind of took care of everything here. So instead of having that done manually and using the user login form that's already built in, we're gonna do all of this by hand. So up here, we're first gonna check the method here. So we're gonna do if request.method. If this is equal to post, so that means the user entered their information and logged in here. Well, we want to be able to get the email, and we're just gonna go ahead and go into request.post.get, and we're gonna get the, not email, but the name here, or username. Okay, so that's gonna be username. So after that, we also want to get the password. So we'll just do password, and that's going to get the password. So these two values will be sent from the front end. So we're just getting the values here. And once we get those, I want to first make sure that this user exists. So I'm going to use a try catch block. So we're going to do try, and we're going to say user, and we'll just try to query that user. So let's see, I need to import that user model. So we'll go into models here, and I imported that built-in user right here. We'll bring that into our views, and let me close out the navigation bar. So I bring in the user, and we're going to check if this user exists. So user.objects.get, and we're just going to go ahead and say username is equal to username. So I want to make sure this user exists. If it doesn't, we want to throw some kind of error. So we'll just go ahead and do accept here. And at this point, instead of working with something like flash messages, we're going to go ahead and just render. Let's see, actually, how do I want to do this? I actually might be able to use flash messages. So let's try this. Let's actually look up Django flash messages. I wasn't planning to do this, but let's go ahead and try this. So these messages are really cool because they store this inside of Django, as far as I think they're in the sessions, and they only are stored inside of one browser refresh. So we won't go into the details here, but what I'm going to do here is just grab these messages here. So I'm going to grab this import. Actually, let's see. So we're going to import this like that. So from django.contrib import messages, and we're going to bring this in right here. So just underneath render and redirect. And I'll show you what this means, or what this is, in a second. So then we need to be able to add in a message here. So we can go ahead and do messages dot, and then we can specify a type of message. So if a user doesn't exist, we want to be able to throw in an error message. So I'm going to take in this one. So we're going into messages dot error. That's going to give us the type of message. We throw in the request and then the actual message that we want to output. So we'll bring this in right here. If a user doesn't exist, we'll throw in an error message, and we'll say user does not exist. Okay, so like that. So if a user doesn't exist, we're going to throw in that message. And let's try this really quick. So we're not doing much here. We're just going to go ahead and try this. So let's say we want to throw in a user that isn't in our database. We're going to click that, and I just realized we need to output this flash message. So now to actually output it, we're going to go down here inside of the Django documentation, and let's copy this entire statement here. So we're going to see if we have any messages in our template. If we do, we're just going to go ahead and output all the messages. So we're going to bring this into, let's see, I'm going to bring this into the main template here. So we'll add this to main.html. Sorry if I'm going a little bit fast. I didn't plan for this part, but I do want to search this, or I do want to show you this. So underneath our nav bar, let's add this in. So that means anywhere we have a flash message, it will appear. So messages are going to be passed into our template here, just like that. So we can see the messages here. We can access the messages like this. So we see if we have any messages, then we just output those messages here. And there's that weird if statement. If you just copy and paste it directly, that's what it's going to look like. So let's actually just take out this tag here. And let's just say I'll put the message here, and that's it. So that'll clean it up a little bit better. So we have a UL tag. If we have a message, we output it. So we check if we have them. There we go. So let's try this one more time. So we'll go ahead and try to refresh this. So if I type this in and hit login, it says user does not exist. And then if I try to refresh that, that only appears for that page. So we have a message that tells us what's happening here. And that's a little bit convenient there to be able to actually just output this instead of not knowing what's happening. So we're just going to check if this user exists. If they don't, we're going to output that error. Now, if the user does exist, we're going to go ahead and continue here. So we're going to go ahead and do user, and we're going to use the authenticate method. So authenticate like that. And this is a method that we have to import here. So we're just going to go ahead and import this. And this is going to be from django.contrib. It's spelled Django there. So django.contrib.auth. And we're going to import authenticate. And we're also going to import the login method. And this is why we couldn't name that specific view login. And we also want to import the logout method. So we're going to use authenticate, and once we make sure that we have a user, we want to authenticate this user. So we want to make sure that whatever the credentials are for this specific user, we want to make sure that they're correct. So we'll just go ahead and do authenticate. We'll pass in request here, and then we're going to pass in the username, and we'll throw in the username that we got here. So from here, and we're going to throw in the password. So we're going to authenticate the user. So what authenticate is going to do is it's either going to give us an error or it's going to return back a user object that matches these credentials. So we have a user now if the user credentials were correct. If they weren't, well, it's going to give us an error. So now we're just going to go ahead and do if user is not none. So that means if we got a user, so it's either a user or none, then let's go ahead and log in this user. So we're going to use the login method. So we'll do login. And for the login method, all we do is pass in the request object and then the user. And login, what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and add in that session in the database and then inside of our browser, and the user will be officially logged in. So once the user is logged in, we'll just go ahead and do return, redirect, and we want to send the user to the home page. So that's going to log in a user. So let's recap this. We get the username and password. We check if the user exists. If the user does exist somewhere, we make sure that the credentials are correct. We get the user object based on the username and password. We log a user in. This creates a session in the database and the browser, and then we redirect a user. Now we want one more thing here. If the user is not logged in, we'll just say else, and we're going to create another flash message. So we're going to write in else, and we'll just say username. So username or password does not exist. So let me scroll up here. So username or password does not exist. Okay, so let's check this out here. So if I go in here, we'll refresh it. We're going to enter in our credentials. Mine are already entered in there, so go ahead and write your stuff in there. Log in, and now I'm redirected to the home page. So if I go here, go into application, we'll check out that session. I can just remove the session ID, and that's automatically going to log my user out here. So if I go ahead and refresh that, go to the home page, the user is not there. Now we're not doing anything like restricting a user from certain pages like that. So we haven't done that just yet. We'll take care of that in a bit here. So If I log a user in, a session gets created and we redirect a user. Now, what if I want to log out a user? So let's go ahead and add that in here. So we can actually access the request object directly inside of a template. So we'll go into the navigation bar and we're going to write in a condition here. So we're first going to check if a user is authenticated. So we'll do if user, so we can access, or if request dot user dot is underscore authenticated. So if a user is authenticated, then let's go ahead and output the login button or the log out button. So we'll add in another link and we're just going to say log out, and we'll fix up that URL in a second. So we'll go ahead and close that end if statement, or the if statement. So we'll just do end if, and then we're going to add in an else statement. So we'll just do else. So if a user is authenticated, that means we have a session in the browser. Then go ahead and add in the log out button. If the user is logged in or logged out or not authenticated, then go ahead and prompt them to log in. So let's go ahead and refresh that. So we see a log out button right now. So we want to be able to log out a user now. So let's go ahead and go back into our views, and we're going to create a log out view. And this is going to be just a view. We don't need a template for this. And we already imported the login or the log out function. So we'll go down here just underneath login. We'll create a method here and we'll just say log out user like that. So we'll throw in request. And this method is just going to be a get request. So we'll just go ahead and return redirect, and we're going to send the user to the home page. So let's just go ahead and do that. Now, all we need to do here is use the logout method, pass in request, and this is going to delete that token, therefore deleting that user. So in the URLs here, let's go ahead and bring this in. We'll copy and paste login, and we'll just do log out like that. And then we can do log out user. And then the name will be log out. And now we can go to the navigation bar and specify the URL tag to point to log out. So we'll just do URL and then log out. Okay, so let's give this a shot here. So if I go ahead and go to the home page, we're logged in. If I go to log out, it's going to clear the user information, and now we're officially logged out. So I can go to log in. I can log in the user right here, and we see that be updated here. So at this point, what I want to do is restrict some pages here based on the user and their status of whether they're logged in or just a user browsing through the website here. So we have the login, log out functionality, but it really doesn't do much for us here. So the first thing I want to do is make a quick import here and actually add in a decorator above a view that I want to restrict. Now, with class-based views, we use mixins for this. We can also use middleware for this. There's a lot of different ways to actually restrict a user, but we're going to use simple decorators for this functionality. So the first thing I'm going to do is import this decorator. So we're going to go into django.contrib. So from django.contrib, and we're going to go into .auth.decorators, and then we're going to import login required. Now, the page that I want to restrict here is going to be a create page. So the create room here, at one point I actually want to remove the button completely if a user is not logged in, or maybe just redirect them. I don't know exactly how I want to figure this out here. So let's just go ahead and do login required. So that's all we have to do here. Now, this doesn't check the type of user, what permissions they have. That's going to be a little bit more functionality. But at this point, once we add this decorator, a user that is not authenticated, if their session ID is not in the browser and it's not credible, they will be simply redirected. Now, we can specify where we want to redirect that user. In this case, I want to redirect the user to the login page. So let's go ahead and try this. What the heck did I do there? So I'm going to, oh, I clicked on that decorator. Okay, so I'm going to save that. We have the login required decorator above the create view method. So I want to log out here, and it looks like because of that thing that I just did, had some kind of big error. So let me clear that and restart the server. So login required. Let's see, we have a login URL, and I need to remove that /. Okay, login required, got an unexpected argument. This needs to be login URL. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we have a login URL and that issue goes away. So we'll go back to this page here, we log out a user, and if I try to go to create room, we're redirected back to the login page. And for now, I'm just gonna leave it like this actually. So I actually like this because we want to prompt a user to create a room, but if they're not registered, we want to encourage them to either log in or register, which we'll add here in a second. So once we have that, I also want to add in login required to update room. So I don't want just anybody updating a room. And I also want to make sure that only authenticated users can delete a room. So that's how we can actually restrict users. Now, in this case, in theory, if I know somebody's room ID, I can just log in and I'll be allowed to go ahead and update their room. So I want to restrict a user. So let's see, how do I want to do this? So at this point, I'm just going to write in a condition right here. There's a bunch of different ways of doing this. We'll just say if request.user is not equal to, let's see, so we can do if request.user is not equal to room.user, then we just want to return, we'll just do return, let's see, we'll just do some kind of HTTP response. So I'm going to import that really quick. I know I removed it, but we'll just add that in right here. So we'll just do from django.http import HTTP response. So if a user is not the correct user, meaning they're not the owner here, let's just do return, and then we'll just do HTTP response, and we'll just say you are not allowed here. Okay, so if they're not the owner, we're gonna yell at them here. So if they're not the room user, so if they're not equal to that, let's go ahead and stop them. So update room, let's check this out here. So we'll log in as Dennis, and let's just try to edit Tim's room. So as a super user, at some point, we will want to add in functionality so an admin can edit this. So let's see, which room does Tim own? So we have Tim right here. So we'll go to edit, and room object has no attribute user. So we'll do room.host like that. So that's what it was. So we just want to check that again. We'll go ahead and see this. So I am not allowed here because that's Tim's room. And let's say I want to edit my own. Well, I'm allowed to do that. So we could do something like that. And we can also say if request.user is not the host, or request.user, or we can say maybe and we can just say if the user is not a super user. So I won't worry about that. And we're just going to add in this check here for update, and we're going to add this for delete. Okay, so now only the correct user can update this. Now, let's see, at this point, I should probably hide this button completely here from any user that's not the owner. So we see my rooms right here. I'm logged in as Dennis. We'll go to Tim's, and we're going to remove this stuff right here. So we'll go ahead and go into the home page. So we'll close out the nav bar, all these links that I have open here. We'll close out URLs here, and let's go to home. And I just want to make sure that if I'm not the user, I don't see the delete and edit button. So I'm just getting rid of this right here. So we'll go up here. Let's see. So that is inside of rooms, and we'll just say if the user is not authenticated, remove it. So if user dot, or if request dot user is not equal to the owner, let's just do that. Let's just do room dot host. Then let's just make sure we hide this information. So let's see if the user is the host. So we'll just do if the user is equal to the host, then we'll display that information. So we'll just do end if like that. Okay, so that should hide that information now. So let's try this here. So we'll go ahead and refresh it. So now Tim can only edit his, I can only edit mine or delete mine, and we are good to go. Okay, so let's see, what else do I want to do here? Now, I also maybe want to restrict a user from going to the login page. So at this point, if I'm already logged in and I try to go manually to this URL, maybe we can just redirect a user here. So we don't want a user re-logging in. So we'll just go ahead and add this functionality in here. We'll go into login, and we'll just do if request.user.is_authenticated. So this is a method that really helps us here, authenticated. Okay, can't spell that word. We'll just do return redirect, and let's just send the user to the home page. Okay, so if I'm logged in, I shouldn't be allowed to be on this page. Okay, looks good here. All right, so what do we want to do next here? So only the owner can update and delete their information. We restricted pages here. Only a user can edit their own post. Now let's go ahead and move to registration. So for registration, let's log out here. We'll go to the login button here, and we want to add in a link for that register page. So we'll first go to login register, so that template, and we're just going to go ahead and add this inside of this div right here. So we'll create another div actually. So we'll just wrap this for the login page, and then we'll have a register page. So I'm just going to copy this div right here. We'll paste that down here, and we're just going to change up the contents here. So we'll just say register for this button. Okay, and then for the actual form fields, we're going to auto generate that, so we don't need that. And we want to write a condition. So at this point, both form fields are going to be rendered here. So we want to hide this in a second. So what we can do here is we can actually pass in like a page name. So we'll just do page, and this is going to be the login page. So we're just going to specify a variable here in a string value, and we'll just say login. Why can't I write that? Login, and there we go. Okay, so we're also going to take this page, throw this into the context dictionary, paste that in right here. That's the login page. And then we're going to create a register page too. So register will be underneath logout, and we're going to call this register user. Okay, we'll throw in request here. We'll specify the page. The page is going to be register, return, render. We'll pass in request, and then the template. Okay, so we're returning back the same template, and we're passing in the page. Now, I just want to make sure to create a view for this. So we'll copy login, and we're just going to do register. We'll bring in register right here.